Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you're watching what if Kid Naruto found an ancient Taijutsu. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Always wasting no time. Let's start the story.
It was not the same as before, not so precise and succinct like a wildfire. The thin border between black and white had widened and given way to gray. The line of gray was rapidly expanding to include everything the young child could see. Naruto Uzumaki, a cheerful and intelligent boy, had not yet given up on his lifelong ambition. But the means of attaining it was not quite so innocent. He was aware that he needed to be strong in order to fulfill his dream of becoming Hokage. The blonde watched his kunai veer off course and scowled. Not for the first time, the 11-year-old ninja was currently training in a dimly lit area on the outskirts of the village, where few people went due to the practicality of city life rather than the fact that it was seedy. A ninja village couldn't afford to have shady areas. After all, nevertheless, Naruto was in the seclusion it provided. Save for the girl who was stalking him from a corner, naturally, he had no idea at all. Naruto moaned as he went to get his kunai from the grass and bush. He only had a handful of them, and it would be a murder on his food and repair supply money to replace even one. The young blonde finally found kunai, but it took some time because of the excessive shadows cast by the overgrown trees. It was set into a wooden chest that had vines surrounding the box, giving the impression that the chest was glowing. The young boy exclaimed, "Ooh, a treasure chest," as he imagined some pirates hiding their loot here. Naturally, he never thought about the possibility that some ninja might have returned with it and hidden it here in order to give Naruto the same level of privacy he desired. Whatever the case, it had been lying here for years, forgotten and abandoned, until this very moment. Somehow uncorroded, Naruto tore away at the old lock with the dexterity of a child eager to open the lid. A gust of red energy blew over Naruto, who grinned maniacally as it swept through the room. Cool. Fidgety and sensitive to the energy that washed over her, Hinata hid behind a tree. Whatever it was equally powerful to chakra, and the fact that it could be sealed into a chest at all frightened her. Even so, Hinata sat to watch Naruto open a book because she couldn't bear to part with the boy she wanted. "Hokuto Ryuken," Naruto said, perplexed, question marks floating above his head. It appeared to have been printed by a machine, but given the age of the chest and its overgrowth, it must be impossible. The writing was in an old script, but it was accurate and readable nevertheless. Naruto started reading the book. Naruto was even more thrilled when the author claimed to have compiled all of the training regimen, forms, and techniques found in the original training scrolls. Looking into the chest, the blonde boy noticed some armor with a horned helmet. As he lifted the armor, he exclaimed, "Wow, his is amazing." He wasted no time in putting it on and standing there, feeling like a superhero. But he hadn't taken into account that the armor was designed for a fully grown man, and one who was significantly taller than most men. He was dressed in a black leather shirt that hung like a dress, loose pants that gathered at his feet, and a belt that was much too big. Even the tightest belt notch wasn't close to his waist. He complained, "Aw, man. So much for that idea," as she removed the clothes and spread them out on the floor to examine how they should appear. Naruto began to visualize the scene as he studied the patterns, thinking that it would look much better with orange highlights. It was essentially a Shippuden outfit on leather rather than cotton, complete with a golden chestplate, high calf boots, wrist guards, and a faceless helmet with bullhorns facing forward. Naruto laughed a little and pushed the idea away since he knew he would never be able to afford such a thing, not until he was a true ninja, anyway. Despite her self-consciousness, Hinata couldn't help but wonder where the chest with the books, armor, and who knew what else Naruto hadn't brought out came from. "Naruto-kun," she said in a low voice. But the blonde boy was too enthralled with his discovery and took out a second book with a picture of a horse on the cover. "Hey." The boy looked at the book and exclaimed, "I have to get a horse. Where in hell is it going to fit in my apartment?" Naruto chose to use the first of many training forms instead of going back to his kunai practice. "Oh man. This looks too complicated." Hinata, who was hidden away to the side, watched and memorized the form Naruto was going over, fixing them in her own mind. As Naruto was clearly off balance several times, his complaint was well founded, as he wasn't one that had learned to follow forms, but he gritted his teeth and started on the first one. The blonde practiced for hours, gradually becoming the perfected form Hinata had envisioned in her mind. The girl's smile was beautiful as Naruto finally performed the kata flawlessly, her heart pounding fiercely in her chest as he jumped up and down in triumph. However, Naruto knew that this was just the beginning and he was determined to learn this fighting style because it would make him the ultimate ninja. Sadly, the Hyuga clan heiress hurried off, jumping through the trees on her way home, but Hinata continued to watch Naruto until the sun set, the blonde still going over that first form, now so sure of its use that he no longer consulted the book. For a week, every day went like this as Naruto ingrained the form in his mind. Oddly, as he became more adept at the balance and movements, The blonde started to improve his sense of balance in his day-to-day activities and stopped tripping over his own feet unless he was extremely excited. Hinata could only feel proud of Naruto as she saw him advance. The fact that there was no school for the duration of the week, in fact, it was another month before classes resumed for the academy students' final year, helped. Because Naruto and Hinata were so preoccupied with their studies and practices, neither had been paying any attention to the little things that made life worthwhile in the village, such as the gathering of students to play a big practical joke on the new teacher they would be having. Although it wouldn't bother Hinata too much, Naruto would wee himself to sleep at the lost opportunity, but that wasn't a concern at the moment or significant. Gazing at the upcoming lecture, Naruto sighed and said, "Gosh, everyone wants me to meditate. It's so incredibly dull, though." The blonde boy sat in lotus form and read the book, trying to figure out what it meant since meditation is personal to each person. The boy was a little ambiguous, but he explained in detail the consequences of doing it correctly versus incorrectly. Know that Hinata had snuck into Naruto's apartment and read the book or anything. The Hyuga girl blushed from head to toe, remembering the picture of Naruto sprawled out in his bed after a particularly trying training session, the first time she had seen him come home before sunset, and wondering what he was studying. Her lecherous nature kept her eyes on Naruto's body, waiting for that next piece of skin to show itself, and she had seen his entire stomach and almost all the way up his legs before she fled, fainting dead when she got home, her brain overheated. Her focus was diverted from her inner thoughts by a sharp crack in the air, and she was drawn back to Naruto's lotus figure, where an unholy light surrounded his body as a steady stream of green waves rose from his form. Hinata objected. She flashed her hands through a few seals and activated her Byakugan, the veins around her eyes thickening to grotesque proportions as she took in the scene. Although she was nowhere near a master, nor as talented as her older cousin or little sister, she could see the energy flowing through Naruto. The book had mentioned this aura manifesting, but that was only after building up a pool of Motoki, translated as evil battle aura, for several chapters. It was odd, but intriguing. The name of this Motoki, which the book had described, alarmed her, but when she looked at Naruto, she saw that his chakra was actually flowing, much more dense and controlled than usual. While most people radiate tiny wisps of chakra, Naruto typically poured out large amounts, albeit completely unfocused. However, at this precise moment, the energy in his pool was tightening, swirling to a crescendo, and precisely flowing through his body. The green waves floating off his body were the leftover excess, so densely packed and compacted that it was within the visible spectrum. Not unlike medical chakra, the boy believed a nitwit was controlling his overabundant chakra in ways she hadn't seen Chunin capable of. However, she realized that there was no healing property as a stream of the chakra drained the life of the grass beneath and near the preteen. Hinata waited a few moments before following along as Naruto quickly jolted out of his trance, his vision wild as he looked left and right. "Man, I feel way too hot," he cried as he got up, tucked his book in his back pouch, and headed for the trees, the glow still surrounding him but gradually fading. Gak. What she arrived to had her fainting with a blush and overheated brain as Naruto was just pulling off his undershorts, back to the girl's point of arrival with his last bit of clothing gone. Naruto jumped into the lake in front of him with a cheesy grin. "Yeah. It's time to relax." Before his face softened to one of loneliness, the boy, who was accustomed to playing by himself, liked splashing the water at the people he thought were in the lake with him for a short while. It wasn't like anyone came to this side anyhow, as it was reserved for the blonde pariah. "That's enough of that," he said, slapping his own face a couple of times to wipe away the depression. He clambered out of the water and quickly dried off before dressing and going back to meditation at the lake's edge. Naruto was glowing green when he felt a jolt at the corners of his senses. Someone was around him, and he was determined to find out who and why. "Hey!" he yelled into the tree line far away. "What do you think you're doing watching me, Dabbeo?" Since there was no response, the blonde got up and strode in the direction of the presence. The person he felt hovering on the edge of his senses was there. He rounded a tree and discovered a slumped Hinata with a silly grin on her red face and blood slowly dripping from her nose. He wasn't sure how he had felt the presence in the first place, but he dismissed it as awesome and let the thought die. "Hinata? Don't die, hold on." Another week had passed, and the Hyuga heiress, Hinata, was being coached by Naruto in the first Kata form of Hokuto Ryuken. She was embarrassed when Naruto noticed that she was putting her feet in the wrong way, but he wasn't a mean taskmaster and didn't label her useless like her father and other teachers did. Instead, he would do what he was about to do. Unaware of the rapture the girl was going through, she fought hard against a faint threat to claim her as Naruto shifted her stance slightly and placed his body against hers, working through the Kata as one entity. Naruto flowed through his first mastered Kata with such ease that it looked beautiful. In fact, if one had watched how he led the girl around the forested clearing with his chest against Hinata's back, they would have assumed the two were dancing rather intimately. As they ended the Kata, Hinata gave life to her voice. And Naruto, she mumbled, the words dying on her lips as she began weakly when Naruto touched her. Her body flowed like water, and his presence, not to mention his radiant energy, flowed over the girl, giving her a sense of being owned, moreover, being owned by someone who truly wanted her around. Although he had no idea that she had always been there, Naruto was reassuring himself that he wouldn't let this slip from his fingers as he scowled at the bashful girl, his first and only friend in the village. Sorry, what was that, Hinata-chan? A little stronger than the first time, but still barely a whisper, she said, I want to pledge myself to you. As he examined the girl, Naruto scowled and said, Hinata, I'm not very smart, that kind of thing is beyond my comprehension near the end, he exclaimed with waves of joy, at least not yet anyway, but if you stick with me, we'll become the best ninjas ever. He cheered, not really understanding what he was saying to the enamored girl. After all, I'm going to be Hokage one day and I'll need someone that can keep me on my toes. After he completed a kata with the girl, Naruto was accustomed to her taking breaks like this. At first, he thought he might have done something to enrage her, but he soon discovered that Hinata loved his hands-on approach and even seemed to get the forms easier. While she was taking a break, Naruto worked on his second kata, the third chapter of the book that emphasizes the need of Motoki to execute it correctly. He frowned as he concentrated on tightening and balancing his chakra while performing a complex series of punches and kicks, releasing energy at specific points that produced some incredible special effects. Naruto channeled his Motoki and executed an uppercut, marveling at the spiraling swirl of energy that followed his hand and forearm. His hand glowed brightly as he finished the strike, pushing more energy at the crescendo, and then he delivered a low roundhouse kick that was so powerful that it cracked the air. Hinata sat in lotus, meditating, and it was only after she started training with Naruto that she really came to respect the boy. The forms in the first chapter were simply a series of strikes that had to be performed 100 times a day until the body moved on its own, but Naruto had turned them into a kata, which was anathema to ninjas outside the Hyuga clan and practitioners of a few styles that were still in use from before the Warring Ages. She had no idea how Naruto had learned to create a kata on his own, but the way he moved through the strikes was elegant and strong, and she was still making simple mistakes after only a week of training. The girl would have given up and called herself a failure if it weren't for the way Naruto would keep her to himself and move with her through the perfect. However, Naruto was different. He thought along the lines of failures, seeing only his determination to become Hokage and let nothing stand in his way to achieve this goal. She watched Naruto as he shook his head and stumbled a little, and it seemed that the kata he was building wasn't coming together as smoothly as the previous one, or perhaps it was the blending of chakra with strikes? The amount of energy, unfocused as the chapter emphasized, was incredible. No Hyuga would waste so much chakra on a simple strike, but Naruto was throwing attacks with wild abandon. It wasn't the first time this week either, but as she moved through the movements, her body led her and her mind settled into a state of euphoria. Time didn't mean anything to her, and the demeaning words of her family didn't exist in this state of mind. All she saw was Naruto's promise to keep her by his side even after he became Hokage. Hinata sighed and regained her feet, her center once again balanced, and she started performing the first kata, her body remembering the warmth of Naruto holding her. She smiled. Hinata was startled out of her euphoric state by the sounds of hand clapping, and she stopped to turn and face Naruto, who was beaming and staring at her. And Naruto-kun. That's it, Hinata-chan, the blonde boy said, walking right up beside the girl and giving her a proud shoulder pat. That's how you have to do it, he said proudly, the way you let your body take over and your mind relax. Allow your body to function so that your mind can concentrate on your environment. Hinata's slight figure firmed as she nodded firmly, looking at the boy who was the same size as her. Yes, she said, I can do this, with a conviction Naruto completely shared. Okay, Hinata-chan, I'll be cheering you on from here. Though she blushed, Hinata gave herself permission to regain that mental state, allowing her body to take over in ways she never would have thought possible. With her arms and legs slashing out in violent bursts and flowing in the subsequent series of strikes, her mind relaxed, and she simply moved. She's finally got it, Naruto said, nodding to himself after observing her flow flawlessly a few times. He was fortunate to have reached that level on the first day and went into his 100 kata that same night, followed by 200 kata every day for the first week. After all, he had more energy than most of the kids he knew and no one to go home to, so staying out late wasn't a problem for the blonde. Not she's just gotta do it 100 times a day until she doesn't have to separate her mind from the movements, he evaluated. Naruto entered his new kata, blasting chakra wildly as he tried the described strikes, but it was much too difficult to concentrate on both the forms and the chakra burst. Seeing Hinata move so elegantly and unnecessary, He had an epiphany and repeated the kata using only the strikes a few times until he could do it flawlessly without having to think about them. Hours passed as Naruto added one chakra burst at a time, his body beginning to learn how to withstand the blows. It would take him a long time to master this kata, but it was a start. He paused as he gazed up at the sky, seeing the stars. The blonde boy was taken aback by Hinata's grunting, since the girl usually left before the sun set. Naruto mumbled, "Wow, she looks amazing like that." As he took in the vision of the diligent girl, he shook his head, cleared his mind, and walked up to the girl, who was glowing from the moonlight with a sheen of sweat on her skin. Adding to her glow, "Hinata-chan," he called out softly, breaking the girl's mindset, though she was still flowing through the kata precisely. "En Naruto-kun." As Hinata became more aware of her surroundings, she drew her strikes to a close and panted lightly. She took a towel and wiped her arms and forehead weakly. Her limbs were sore and her legs felt like jelly. She had never worked her young body this hard before, and she was certainly paying for it now. She fell to her knees feebly and smiled up at Naruto sweetly. As his eyes began to close, she said, "I think I overdid it a little." "Here, I'll take you home," Naruto said, grinning back and kneeling in front of her with his back to her. "Just hold on tight," he commanded as the girl wrapped her limbs around his body, her face a bright cherry red as steam blasted from her ears. "Yosho. Let's go," he bellowed, and with more vigor than Hinata believed was possible, he took to the trees. She thought to herself, to hold Naruto-kun like this, as her body relaxed into his warmth before her perverted mind could conjure up an image, she passed out from exhaustion and dozed off, while Naruto maintained his pace to prevent the girl from being jostled too violently. Naruto arrived at the Hyuga compound in a matter of minutes, but getting inside was a completely different matter. 4 young ninja guarded the entrance, and as he sat on the ground and approached with a warm smile on his face, the 4 sneered at the blonde boy but remained silent, at least until he revealed the girl hanging over his shoulder. "Hey." Hinata-chan fell asleep at a training ground, he began, but one of the guards grabbed her. He growled angrily, "You don't touch her, you little monster," his pale lavender eyes piercing Naruto's chest as the blonde glanced around and saw that the other 3 were following suit. Naruto growled under his breath and snarled back at them, saying, "The assholes, you know a simple, thank you, wouldn't hurt." He turned his butt to the 4, gave it a few slaps, and jumped off wondering what would happen if the Hyuga clan, who all seemed to despise him, discovered that Hinata had been training with him. He shook his head to put the idea of losing a new friend out of his head and returned home to take a shower and change. The boy had no idea that the original owner of the treasure chest was observing him with curiosity, his hands forming patterns around a crystal ball. Most interesting, Hiruzen Sarutobi thought warmly, to think that Naruto would actually be capable of mastering the only style I couldn't wrap my mind around. As he packed his pipe and snapped his fingers to create a flame, he leaned back and puffed a few times. The old ninja, also known as the god of shinobi, the professor and 3rd Sandaime Hokage, thought about the numerous scrolls he had collected into a series of books. The idea of a new energy had stopped Hiruzen's training in its tracks because his body and mind would not accept it, but he could only shake his head as he gazed at Naruto, sitting in his bed, meditating and letting energy flow from his body. With a picture of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki in his head, he evaluated with fondness. Well, he's certainly the son of that man in her, but he wondered how this would impact his education. Hinata, whose face was pensive and nervous, approached the training ground. Naruto enjoyed in silence. 2 days had passed since she had been carried home. The first day had been spent sleeping because she had overtaxed her body, but the second day she was awake, too sore to move a muscle, but awake nonetheless. "Hinata-chan." Naruto cheered out as he stopped his kata and ran over, his bright sunny face instantly quelling the girl's doubts. She had assumed Naruto would think her abandoning him after 2 days of no contact, yet here he was, happy as ever to see her. "Hey, I guess you really overdid it then?" As Naruto guided her to where he kept his book on a stump, Hinata nodded modestly, her anxiety gradually subsiding. "I finally got that second kata down." He held up his hands, glowing with waves of chakra, and looked at each one in turn. "It was difficult, but I just finished before you got here," he said proudly. When Hinata's face got so close to Naruto's hands, she cheered, "That's amazing." As she gaped in wonder at the raw energy being tossed around, the Hyuga heiress reached out to touch the green chakra wafts, feeling Naruto's resolve radiating through them. So warm. After letting the energy drain and massaging the back of his neck, Naruto turned to Hinata and smiled cheesily, saying, "Hey, Hinata-chan, want to go play in the lake?" Even though it didn't show on his face and it seemed like a straightforward request, Naruto was extremely anxious as he waited for her to turn him down. All he ever wanted was someone who would play with him. And, of course, to become Hokage. With her black hair dancing in time, Hinata blushed and nodded her head. Does Naruto-kun want to see me like that? The girl asked herself, looking at the cheering blonde idiot with a gentle smile on her face. I'd like to, she muttered. Go swimming, yes, and the blonde boy took her arm, letting her and his interlock as he led them to his book and pocketed it. All right. I brought my swim trunks with me since I was already planning to go, but if you need to go grab yours, I'll wait where I found you that day, he said, his smile brightening even more. Hinata gave a gentle nod and sped off in the direction of her house, feeling thankful for the chance because she wasn't sure if her body was ready to resume training just yet and thought a good swim would help her body limber up with her head focused. She sped through the trees until she arrived at the actual village and walked quickly. Hinata-chan, be patient. The voice was that of Ino Yamanaka, the blonde prodigy of the Yamanaka clan and the pride of her father, Inoichi. But Hinata was unable to identify it because she didn't frequently associate with anyone until recently. Hello, Ino-san, she said softly, her voice more tight and firm than she would like to admit, and dare Hinata say it, she sounded like a normal girl. Hinata stopped walking and waited for the girl to catch up. Before giving the Hyuga a loving glomp, Ino was equally surprised. Hinata, you're speaking normally. That's so amazing, I'm going to tell everyone. Hold on, give me a minute, Ino exclaimed as she turned to face the doorway she had just left inside. She saw a group of 12 children her own age, some of whom she recognized as Shino Aburame, Kiba Inazuka, Shoji Akamichi, and Shikamaru Nara. The other children, who were popular girls who often visited Ino's circle, she had never met. She waved to her gathered group of friends and said, Hey guys, come on over here. Hinata can talk like a normal person. Take a look, she exclaimed. Being the center of attention made Hinata flush, but she waved her hand affectionately and said, It's not that serious, Ino-san, in a quiet voice that was clear and free of stuttering. One of the girls exclaimed, Wow, she sounds so cute. Her hands clasped together as tiny hearts twirled in her eyes. She grabbed Hinata and pulled her into the group, demanding, You gotta tell us what happened, making the other girls equally ecstatic and escorting the girl away. It was 7 hours later, and at first Naruto thought the girl might have been delayed by something important, so he meditated to increase his Motoki pool elsewhere. Naruto was splashing in the water, thinking how great it would be to get splashed back for once, his smile never faltering, but as the sun began to fall, that joy began to wane. After 5 hours of expanding his pools, Naruto had jumped back into the water and played around alone once more, still determined not to give up on Hinata's arrival. However, after 7 hours, with the sun setting, he made the decision to leave the lake. He had found the exercise while peeking at chapter 4, frustrated as he had been earlier in the week at not being able to master the second kata. The blonde boy wiped at the water on his face, but he wasn't crying or anything. He quickly changed into his clothes and headed back to his remote forest area, picking up a kunai along the way. He didn't know who owned it, but he would keep it because it's not like that person would miss a simple dagger. The blonde boy hurried off, heading for his own training ground, and returned to his kata, adding his chakra bursts to each strike, following the kata through. He had spent a whole week learning the forms while adding chakra, and now that he knew how to do it right, he was resolved to commit this one to memory just as he had the last. Hinata had just reached the lake, which was deserted, while Naruto was training. If he would gone, you idiot. You let those people drag you around all day, she told herself in her head, her eyes lowering in sullen despair. If he didn't hate you after abandoning him for 2 days, he will now, after you've stood him up. With a blue robe over her one-piece swimsuit, the Hyuga girl turned away from the lake, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she walked home in silence, her heart shattered, but she made the decision to let Naruto be and to stop disappointing him. She would speak to him when school resumed in a few days. As he approached the tree trunk where 4 more holes were punched, Naruto scowled and threw his now 4 kunai, one of which struck true and embedded deeply into the tree, while the other went wide and clanged futilely once more. The kunai he had found struck the tree while his other ones never came close. You must be a lucky charm, he said to the weapon, once more by himself. With a weary sigh, he shook his head and yanked the kunai free, wondering for the second time why and how this one kunai could hit every time while the others moved on. His eyes drooped as he listened to the sound of wind rustling leaves. The familiar sound of his friend Hinata training had vanished, and he was alone here, back to how things had begun so long ago. With a shrug, he went into the undergrowth to get his other 3 weapons because his mind couldn't concentrate on such a task for very long. A hushed voice said, "This is the only way, Itachi," but Naruto didn't recognize the voice or the name. "Shisui, that's not acceptable to me. We must inform the council and the Hokage if there is only one possible solution," a second voice said, sounding weary and dejected. "Who is present?" 4 shuriken and a kunai sank into Naruto's body, precisely piercing his shoulder and legs. Naruto started to perspire. This was not his weak. Yaa. He barely had time to scream in agony before Itachi materialized behind him, a kunai over the boy's throat. As Shisui grinned at the blonde boy, Itachi slowly closed his eyes before blinking them open again. Naruto-kun. As Itachi released Naruto, the older teen said, "I'm sorry about that, but there's some really bad people out here." The two drew the blades away from Naruto's body and watched in awe as the boy recovered, his skin smoking with hints of red and green chakra. Shisui sat in front of Naruto with a broad smile on his face and said, "What have you been up to, my future Hokage?" Itachi nodded and disappeared in a flurry of leaves after exchanging glances. "Have you been putting in a lot of training?" The Uchiha never really spoke to Shisui, so Naruto didn't recognize his voice, but the young elite had frequently retrieved extra food and clothing or, mistakenly, dropped off too much food money for Naruto. Naruto nodded and smiled. "Yeah. Kunai was what I was throwing, but I got one to hit the target," he complained, his happiness turning to resentment. Shisui gave the boy a gentle smile and said, "I tell you what, I'll help you for a bit, until Itachi returns, then I have to get back to my rounds," to which Naruto enthusiastically agreed. "Let me see your kunai, Gaki," he asked affectionately. The Uchiha immediately scowled as Naruto gave him a set of 4 throwing daggers, taking the 3 he had initially and placing them in his pouch before drawing 7 of his own and giving them to Naruto. "This will be my gift to you since I haven't gotten you anything in a while," he said. Naruto clutched the kunai greedily and devilishly, and as he watched the boy, Shisui wondered what it would be like to have a brother like Itachi. His best friend had the good life, while he was alone, his family dead while on some mission, and the super prodigy had never felt a love for the village as much as he did when he saw the blonde boy's bright smiles, and it was this love that had made him abandon his clan's plan to overthrow Hiruzen. "Naruto, you are a very special boy," so that only Naruto could hear, he whispered. "I hope you never change. Hey, would you be willing to teach me how to throw something?" The person who was calling out Shisui could wait. Shisui laughed gleefully and nodded, ruffling Naruto's hair and going about teaching him how to throw accurately. He scowled briefly as he felt someone was observing, but since they decided to stay hidden, he would leave it alone. Naruto, as a Jinchuriki and the village outcast, would probably never get this type of opportunity to again. Hiruzen grinned broadly as he observed Shisui taking time out of his day to assist Naruto. Although the Hokage was capable of using his crystal ball to scrawl, he was still oblivious to the danger that was imminent from within. To be honest, he never gave the idea of keeping an eye on his loved ones much thought, and he only occasionally used it to check on Naruto, so it was unexpected when Shisui's eyes hardened and he looked to the side. Hiruzen used his ball to find a figure dressed as an Anbu but bearing a marking that identified the man as Root, a distinct branch of underground ninja that Danzo Shimura raised and employed. Hiruzen disappeared from his room, 6 Anbu chasing after him as he hurried to where Naruto was, praying in silence that it wasn't too late. Few knew the man was capable of such speed. Naruto was astounded by the fact that he had just thrown 6 of 7 bullseye shots, with the 7th escaping the target after tapping the handle of an embedded kunai. "No way, have you seen that?" With a warm smile, Shisui patted Naruto's shoulder and said, "Well, Naruto, I'm sorry but you're gonna have to go back home now and forget that you ever saw me here," using a genjutsu to make Naruto follow his instructions to the letter. He sighed as Naruto turned to go, the 7 kunai still in the tree where he had thrown them. "You can come out now," Shisui said, standing in a relaxed stance with his hand in his kunai pouch. Prepared for battle, he scowled to himself as he realized that all he had with him was Naruto's off-balance kunai, and he took one out, opting not to throw it when a man in a black cloak charged him quickly. Shisui held up the kunai to deflect the blade as the man in the cloak drew out a short sword, and there was a spray of blood and a flash of light. As Itachi guided him and the 6 Anbu to Shisui's final destination, Hiruzen zipped by overhead, passing Naruto, who walked aimlessly towards his apartment, oblivious to the violent movement. After working up the courage to approach the blonde before school started, Hinata discovered him walking under the influence of a genjutsu. Naruto-kun," she said softly as she stood aside, and Naruto continued his journey without ever turning to face her. Feeling brave, Hinata said. "I'm sorry," she exclaimed with pride, "I didn't mean to stand you up yesterday." "It's time for you to go home now, and forget that you ever saw me," Naruto ordered, his voice flat and even, showing no signs of the warmth he usually displayed as he ventured on through the trees. Leaving behind a shattered Hinata, her heart fell, and she felt as though she could just die there. And then what he said next broke her to her very core, and she collapsed to the ground, unable to understand why. She gripped her chest tightly and thought painfully, "Forget I ever saw you be but Naruto, I cherish you," she yelled angrily, her voice trembling and shaking as she confessed her feelings, her face flushed and her cheeks wet, the girl sitting on the ground in misery, closing her eyes and simply letting herself cry. A warm, gentle voice said, "I thought I told you, I don't understand that kind of stuff," Naruto said politely, shaking off the genjutsu at the sound of Hinata in pain. Even if it was just emotional pain, he squatted next to Hinata and extended his hand, his eyes as inviting and warm as never before. With a look of bewilderment in her eyes, Hinata cautiously took the blonde's hand, and the girl was able to regain her feet thanks to the strength in that hand. "And Naruto," she whimpered, "I tried to come back right away." As the tears kept coming down, her heart was begging Naruto to listen and forgive her, even though her words had betrayed her just when it counted most. "Don't worry about it," Naruto said, shaking his head and grinning at her as though nothing had ever happened. "I was on my way home. But I'm hungry now." In the hopes that the girl would agree, he said, "You want to grab a bite to eat with me?" The two went to Ichiraku's ramen stand after Hinata nodded happily, her face still a mess as she wiped it with a cloth. Ino started to say, "So then I told that idiot," but stopped when she noticed Hinata and Naruto going to get ramen. "Hey, what's she doing with the loudmouth?" "Hey, Chelsea, you don't think," Ino said to one of her friends, a red-headed civilian directly beneath her in their stacked totem pole of heads. The girls who had gathered around Ino, who were no longer the center of attention, turned to look outside as well. Noticing the strange sight, Naruto was laughing as he spoke, walking backwards and punching the air as if he were fighting or something. Ino was the first, but the last, of the group of girls who were pursuing the two, spying horribly on Naruto and Hinata. The girl turned back to the two and shrugged. "Naruto looks different for some reason," Chelsea said, her gaze sweeping over the preteen. In fact, Naruto appeared a little more full-bodied and less scrawny, and he moved with grace in contrast to his previous style of walking like a country bumpkin, kicking his legs in all directions. "Hey, does he have new clothes on?" Sakura Haruno, Ino's closest friend and Sasuke's likely fiercest competitor, inquired. Ino blinked as she observed the black ninja sandals, the white shorts with an orange belt, and the white tank top tucked in. Although she had not previously remembered him dressing in this manner, she could recall Naruto wearing each item on different occasions. Shaking her head in the negative, Ino drew closer, saying, "I'm gonna listen in on what they're saying. You girls hang back," as she walked casually up to the pair. Naruto exclaimed, "Ah, Ino-chan." Upon seeing the well-liked girl, Ino appeared taken aback and acted extremely professional as she approached, saying, "Hey, we're going to grab some food, would you like to come along?" She fought back a flush as Hinata gave her a glare for staring, but she was fascinated. Ino glanced at the two, and while Naruto was still being silly, Chelsea was right. He was definitely more solid than before, and the way he was moving gave her the chills. It was like watching a predator on the prowl. "Hey, look, there's exactly 3 seats left," Hinata cheered as she hurried over and sat in the middle seat, her heated eyes on Ino. But regrettably, her glare just looked like a normal girl's welcoming gaze. Hinata let out a huff of air at the blonde girl joining them, but she said nothing else because she had just recently won Naruto back. As a result, Naruto appeared to her right and Ino to her left, warmly grinning at the girl. "Dude, you're so lucky." Naruto jumped in his seat and exclaimed, "Hey, Oji-san. I want a beef and shrimp ramen," he said excitedly. The elderly man grinned at Naruto as he looked up from preparing 6 bowls of ramen. "Hey, brat, you lookin' healthy," he said. "Naruto, where have you been?" Naruto never noticed this reaction because it was normal for him, but both of the girls did. They complained about the blonde boy, but none of the customers were willing to leave their ramen unfinished, so they just sat and stewed in their annoyance. "I've been out training. Before class begins, I must strengthen myself so that I can demonstrate my new dance moves." Datbeo, Tuchi's daughter, Ayame, gave Naruto, the boy she thought was a cute little brother, a cat-like smile. "Oh really?" Knowing how much Naruto enjoyed flaunting himself, she teased, "When were you going to show me these sweet new moves?" As she stood on the counter, Naruto smiled like a fox, pointing with his finger at Ayame. "You'll get a sneak peek right here, right now," he said, swatting Tuchi for standing on his counters, now standing on the floor. Naruto smiled even more, chuckling proudly as he assumed the first Kata's initial form and started to move. They had occasionally seen the outdated Kata, but this was Naruto, the boy who couldn't even execute the academy basics correctly, looking more like a berserk with a hard-on for the Inuzuka style. And as he drew to a close, he grinned up at everyone, the silence still ingraining in the restaurant. There was complete and total silence as all eyes were on Naruto, his movements, his arms and legs lashing out with power, control, precision, and a grace that only a dancer could imagine, astounded them. Desperate for approval, Naruto said, "So, what did you think, Ayame ne-san?" He wasn't winded at all and actually appeared to be holding back from showing off, and only Hinata knew exactly what he wasn't revealing. With a quick recovery, Ino jumped out of her seat and glared at Naruto, asking, "Is that why you've been off on your own lately? Did you take inspiration from the Hyuga Juken to create your own look?" Many people were happy that no one had seen Naruto for almost a month, hoping he would be found in a ditch somewhere, but the very idea of him learning from the Hyuga clan frightened them, and murmurs were raised as they considered it. With his cherub-like face twisted in a huff, Naruto surveyed the assembled indignantly. "No, why would I want to imitate such a stuffy style?" But Hinata defended Naruto, saying, Ino-san," the shy Hyuga called as she stood to Naruto's left, her eyes fixed firmly on the blonde girl. "Naruto's not using my family's style at all." Ino crossed her arms, unconvinced. "I don't where you're learning this style from, but if it's not the Hyuga, you'd better start talking," she demanded, her eyes hard and uneasy. "Since it's an open-hand art, we don't use fists, and we hardly ever use kicks. Kicks and fists played a major role in Naruto's kata. It is essentially a distinct kind of art." Even though Ino was feeling down, she continued to glare. "I still want to know where he learned it," she complained. Naruto gave Hinata a big smile and a loving shoulder pat, saying, "Thank you, Hinata-chan." "Oh, Hinata-chan, your ramen is getting cold," Naruto yelled, his voice shaking as if a crime were being committed. As the boy bounced back into a seat, the middle one this time, Hinata felt her face flush red and the room start to spin. "And Naruto actually relied on me to defend him," she thought as her brain melted. Before indulging, Hinata clapped her hands in prayer and shook off the blush before running to her seat. "Wow, did you see that?" Chelsea said, glancing at her group of friends and rumors. "That Naruto, he's improving a lot better," she said, peering through the flap of the tent. Sakura nodded while glancing down at her hands. "I wonder if I should train with him," she thought softly, realizing that her physical prowess was at the bottom of the class. She had the knowledge for things, but not the chakra reserves, nor the endurance to maintain elongated spars. After giving it some thought, the other girls tossed it aside. "We'd rather train with Sasuke-kun," Chelsea said, her heart in her eyes as she set out to find the black-haired ninja. After finishing his lunch, Naruto was a little irritated that Ino was pursuing him, a scowl on her otherwise attractive face. "Come on, Datbeo. Ino-san, stop following me around," he whimpered angrily. "Naruto-kun, I told you earlier," Ino said, scowling at the way Naruto spoke to her and slapping him over the head. "Where are you receiving this training? Please? Despite what you said, Hinata is following you to training, so I don't think you aren't using her Juken. There's no way you suddenly get good at Taijutsu," she thundered in frustration, pointing suspiciously at Hinata. "How many times do I gotta tell you that I'm making up my own Taijutsu based on some old scrolls?" Naruto whimpered drollily, looking like a bewildered kitten with his arms crossed under his chest. Hinata was observing the scene with curiosity while Naruto was busy complaining to himself because Ino was no longer paying attention. "Well, Ino-san, Naruto-kun, perhaps we're making too much noise? Look, if you truly want to learn it, then give me a couple weeks to master this kata and then I'll catch you up," Naruto said, managing a weary sigh and nodding his head in agreement before turning to face Ino. "Deal," he offered, still dissatisfied with the outcome. With her ponytail bouncing in time, Ino nodded her head and scowled prettily. "But, I'm warning you, Naruto. If you try anything funny, I'm going to kick your butt." Naruto shrugged and resumed his walk, with Ino and Hinata still following him. They wandered around the village for almost half an hour before Naruto gave in and led the two girls to his training grounds. He sighed as he took his book out of his pouch and began reading the 4th chapter again, which stressed the importance of increasing one's pool before continuing the book and showed exercises for Motoki control. Unfortunately for Naruto, he didn't know how big of a pull was required for the next section, and he wasn't ready to open the next chapter just yet, at least not until he had a little more control. Though Hinata appeared a little hesitant with some of the steps, Ino observed as she settled into the dance pattern she had seen Naruto employ at the ramen stand. "All right, what's she doing, Naruto?" Ino waved her hands in front of Hinata's face and remarked, "It seems like she's in a trance of some sort." "She's still trying to master the first forms," Naruto said, grinning as he glanced over. "That's where you need to start if you're serious about learning my style." In an attempt to dissuade the blonde girl, he exclaimed proudly, "At the beginning with Hinata." Naruto had no idea what he was motivating when Hinata woke up a little more than 3 hours later. Her mind returned to the forefront of her movements, and although her body continued to move fluidly on its own, she was now conscious of the world around her. The first sound she heard was giggling, and she turned her head slightly to see where it was coming from. Once she saw its source, her movements came to a grinding halt and she became motionless. As he guided her through the first kata, Ino was pressed against Naruto's chest, and the two embraced in a way he had only done with her thus far. Ino-san. To the other two, her question sounded friendly and expressive, so she yelled, "What are you doing?" "This first form is way harder than I thought," Ino said, stepping back from Naruto with a smile on her face and turning to face Hinata. "Hey, Hinata-chan, since you're not supposed to train with Naruto, we were thinking that you should meet up with me at my dad's flower shop and then we'll come here together," the blonde girl said. "Hinata, I keep telling her that it's fine for you to come here on your own," Naruto said, shaking his head after dismissing the idea multiple times, but the Yamanaka wouldn't accept no. He turned to his fellow blonde and argued, "Ino, we've been doing this for a long time." "Yeah, but it's only going to become more and more obvious when Hinata starts walking around like you do now," Ino said, shaking her head, drawing a puzzled frown from the two. "Oh my god, don't tell me you haven't noticed the way Naruto walks now." Only a frenzied, flushed Hinata could hear Ino's final utterance. "I thought you had a crush on him or something." While Naruto gazed at the two girls inquisitively, Hinata shook her head, but her voice was untrustworthy. "Man, I'm so lost Ibeo." He gave Ino a beseeching glance, requesting an explanation of some sort, which made the girly girl shrug and sigh before responding. "Naruto, you looked like a jungle cat or something the way you were moving over here." As she glanced at the boy, she noted, "Your balance and coordination seem to be fixing itself and you don't trip over your own two sandals anymore." As for Hinata-san, she used to be really shy and run away when we would speak to her until like 3 days ago, she said, crossing off the items on her finger list. "Particularly in a ninja village, people will notice these things." Ino smirked and continued. After a while, Naruto stopped listening and wandered around the clearing, examining his own rear end to see if he truly resembled a jungle cat. When he failed to spot a tail, he gave up. "Anyway," he said with pride, "I just want to train really hard so that I can pass the exams." "There's no way you can fail with me to help you," Ino said with a sly smile and crossed her arms beneath her breasts. She grinned and praised, "I have the second best chakra control in our year, only 2 points behind Sakura-chan." "Hey, Hinata-chan, do you think we should keep her around to train with us?" Naruto asked, nodding and turning to face Hinata with a sheepish grin and a hand behind his head. He laughed feebly and admitted, "I'm terrible at using chakra." Hinata nodded, looking thoughtful, but she could also use the help because she wasn't very good at chakra control. "I suppose it could help a lot with our ninjutsu skills," she said, and Ino nodded emphatically and triumphantly. "Yes," Ino exclaimed. "Now, let's return to the first kata, Naruto-sensei," she yelled, throwing herself into Naruto's chest and practically purring at the warmth. Hinata was suddenly having second thoughts, but she was unable to express them after merely agreeing. Naruto walked into the classroom with a confidence that few people have ever had in their lives, and as he got close to a desk on the 3rd floor of the auditorium, he slipped and fell to the ground. Squawking all the way down, he popped up and rubbed the back of his head as soon as he stopped on the floor. With a big smile on his face, Naruto walked up to his seat once more and settled in comfortably. The classroom burst into laughter, and the tension of the first day quickly subsided. Naruto sighed at losing his super cool entrance, but he eventually gave in to the laughter as well, since there would be plenty of opportunities to impress everyone with his presence. He looked around the room for familiar faces and saw a lot of them. Shikamaru, who ignored Ino as she babbled on and on about something he didn't care about, followed by Naruto's crush, Sakura, who was wearing a cute white skirt with pleats and a loose top that didn't restrict her movements in the slightest. Kiba Inuzuka was next, looking rough and ready to fight in his gray shorts and white t-shirt. Naruto sighed as the world disappeared. It had been a gloomy summer of training by himself, and he hadn't seen the pink-haired Kunoichi the whole time. At least he managed to get in some good training. 2 new teachers appeared at the front of the classroom, talking animatedly to each other while they waited for the students to settle in. The first was a young man with a scar across the middle of his face, and the second was a little taller, with long purple hair and a soft smile. Even when turned on Naruto, Naruto looked forward to the sound of the door closing. A slight prod to Naruto's left caused him to turn and see Mixing, a pretty girl of Chinese descent with long black hair that was usually tied in twin odango and then braided the rest of the way down, ending at her buttocks, and a long blue cheongsam with white accents and the image of a chrysanthemum on the back in gold thread. Mixing was 2 years older than all the other students in the class, but she and Naruto were on their 3rd try. "Hey, Mixing," Naruto waved and smiled back at her, the academy's permanent fixture as she had become lately. He vowed to himself that this year would be his, and he would graduate the academy without any issues. "Are you prepared to pass this time?" he asked, and the older girl nodded, her eyes full of hope. "Hello, students." Mizuki waved to everyone and introduced himself before handing the class over to Ruka. The numerous children in attendance were incredibly eager to continue, and Iruka finally felt as though he had found his calling. "My name is Amino Iruka, and I'll be your primary educator," he told the assembled children. Ha ha ha. The fourth Hokage's face, with its swirling patterns and black eye with a line of snot running down his nose, was right beneath the blonde preteen's feet. Naruto's amazing cry, "I'm the greatest," came as he stood atop the Hokage monument, a cliff face that displayed the faces of the previous 4 village leaders. However, it wasn't just the fourth that was vandalized. Naruto had successfully defaced every single face of the monument in broad daylight without anyone noticing. Naruto, you idiot," his homeroom teacher, Iruka Amino, cried in even greater dismay. Naruto pivoted on his heel and scowled at the Chunin who had made it to where he was. "Iruka-sensei, how on earth did you arrive here so fast?" Shaking his head, Iruka said, "Are you serious?" He pointed to a stack of papers and said, "Since you weren't in class, I just went with the educated guess. This is the most overused plot starting point in all Naruto fanfics. At least the hateful village trying to kill you on a stormy night plot isn't being used by this author." Iruka held up a length of rope and said, "Anyway, you'd better let me tie you up so we can continue the story along," in a weary and anxious voice. "Hey, Kiba," Naruto drew lead, leaning over to the Inuzuka with his eyes narrowed in a plot. Pretending to listen to the teacher at the front of the room, Kiba turned to face Naruto, who was whimpering sweetly as his new puppy peered out at the two. "What, Naruto?" he said slowly, as if hinting, "Hey, I need a horse to take my training to next level." Kiba snarled in frustration, but let his blonde classmate finish. "Since your family raises dogs and wolves, I figured you might know where I can get a horse," he said. "Why would I be able to locate a freaking horse, Naruto? They're not at all like dogs," Kiba retorted, but he spoke quietly and softly. "So the Inuzuka don't have horses? Who would have guessed?" Naruto scowled as he pondered this new information and leaned back in his chair. "Psst, Kiba," he called again as an idea struck him. "Naruto, you dolt," Kiba snarled in frustration, but he glanced over again. "Stop bugging me before Iruka calls us out," he said harshly, gritting his teeth. "I heard you guys have some kind of transformation technique that can turn your dogs into humans," Naruto said, casually waving his hand. "Can you use it backwards? Make you a dog, you know?" Iruka scowled as Kiba paused his fictitious note-taking and gave the idea some real thought before a shard of chalk struck his forehead, followed by another thumping from Naruto and Shikamaru, who was dozing off in class. "Warning!" As he employed his big head no jutsu, the instructor yelled. Naruto roared to his feet and slammed his palm against his desk, saying, "Iruka-sensei, screw that. The last day of classes is tomorrow. We'd better give you double detention, Naruto," Iruka said, tossing a dull kunai at him and embedding it in his desk, not to mention that the Hokage monument still needs to be cleaned. With his eyes glaring, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and challenged, "I can't waste time cleaning that damn monument. I'm supposed to be training after class for the finals tomorrow." Hinata sat behind Naruto, putting a hand on the blonde's shoulder and shaking her head, still uncomfortable being the center of attention. Naruto turned to face her and smiled proudly, saying, "Don't worry, Hinata-chan." He promised with a contagious smile that it wouldn't take him long to restore the monument to its dull, original hues. With a devilish smirk on her face, Ino was to her right, and Hinata nodded her head and leaned back. "Don't worry, Naruto-kun. We'll be there to help you out," she whispered, drawing Iruka's focus back to the lecture. In the course of the school year, the Hyuga heiress had quickly discovered that Ino was a playful girl, almost like a kitten in the way that she enjoyed playing with boys. While Naruto was their sensei in every sense of the word, he wasn't exempt from Ino's nature and frequently found himself in compromising situations. Despite all the blonde's affections, she had no real interest in Naruto and had repeatedly told Hinata as much. Naruto blushed and attempted to hide in his t-shirt as the girl ran her toes up and down his back in a seductive manner, and Hinata giggled at the action, her eyes sparkling with laughter. Shikamaru yawned next to Naruto, glanced at Ino's playful foot, and then shook his head silently in resignation. "Too troublesome," he grumbled, and returned to his desk. With a harsh whisper, Naruto gave the boy an elbow and said, "She's your damn cousin, so stop her." "I don't see what that has to do with anything," the Nara said, turning away from Naruto and sitting upright in his chair with his chin in hand and his elbow resting on his desk. He grumbled, "And we're not really cousins, it's just that our fathers and Choji's are really close. Why don't you ask Choji for help?" Choji, for his part, was crossing his arms in defiance and shaking his head angrily. "Naruto, don't try." He opened a bag of potato chips and began munching, saying, "It's like poking a bear to try to stop Ino from flirting and playing her games." Ino and Hinata were the last to leave as the girls laughed together about how hard It must be for Naruto to stay seated as he had. All right, everyone is dismissed for the day, except Naruto, Shikamaru, and Kiba, said Mizuki, another teacher for their class, whose light lavender hair fell softly against the nape of his neck. Remember, tomorrow is the finals, so practice really hard, everyone, he called out as the children filed out of the doorway. Damn Ino for teaching him about erections and how simple they were to grow. Now he couldn't stop himself, and it took him a long time to get used to it. Naruto shot a scathing glare as he struggled against his body's natural reactions. With a smile, Mizuki told the three of them, since you three have detention with me, I'm going to give you all a pop quiz. If you fail it, then don't even bother coming to class tomorrow, as the demerits will automatically fail you for the year, he said. Shikamaru slept, and Kiba and Naruto moaned. Why do you teachers always assign such dreadful tests? Kiba asked sharply. There will be no talking or cheating on this exam, Mizuki said, ignoring the boys' protests as he handed out sheets to each student and then divided them up into different sections of the classroom with a gentle click. He closed the sliding door and left the classroom, saying, I'll be back in 10 minutes to pull you each out to the hall. Shikamaru had just finished his exam and had gone back to sleep, but the other two had not noticed him. Psst, Naruto, came a soft whisper off to the side. Naruto let out a loud wail as soon as the man left the room, and Kiba and Akamaru then howled at the injustice. The blonde boy turned to watch Ino, who was waving at Naruto. What now, Ino-chan? Naruto watched as Ino propped herself up on the windowsill and buffed her nails on her top, complaining, I have to take this damn pop quiz, and waving the paper around. She offered sweetly, for a favor each I might be persuaded to give you the answers. The two boys glanced at the paper, then at the blonde, and finally back at the paper in front of them. The boys groaned in defeat as Ino walked into the classroom, took the papers, and approached Shikamaru, who was sleeping. She leaned to whisper something in his ear, woke up, and quickly filled out the answers before lying back down. Kiba moaned. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Even I make better grades than Shikamaru. He complained angrily when his paper was returned and he saw that 3 of the answers were still blank. Hey, what gives? The Inuzuka boy pointed to the empty area and grumbled, he didn't even finish the damn test? Naruto took a little longer to review the responses and noticed the same thing when he looked up. Duh, dum-dums, instead of getting you perfect scores, I said I could get you passing grades, as if addressing slow children, Ino said. You have to answer the last 3 yourself to demonstrate that you didn't suddenly become geniuses or copy each other's work. The boys complained, but each of them wrote down their final responses as Ino jumped out of the window just before Mizuki came back. The man scowled as he examined the papers, and surprisingly, the responses were sufficient to pass all 3. Well, you certainly passed the written portion, he said. He smirked darkly and said, now let's see how well you 3 work as a team. I just finished setting up an exam with the Sandame, the teacher said as the 3 boys were escorted to the front of the classroom. A forbidden scroll is displayed on a special safe in his office. Given the interest in the 3 children's eyes, he said, if you can get it, you won't have to worry about tomorrow's exams, and you might even find yourselves among the elite Anbu. Even Shikamaru was intrigued. The sounds of gears turning in Naruto's cunning mind sent shivers down the spines of those present. That'll be easy, especially with my awesome new jutsu, he exclaimed, pumping a fist in the air. So, all we gotta do is take some scroll from Gigi and we're done with the academy, Naruto said, puzzled, as he eagerly rubbed his hands together. No, said Mizuki, shaking his head, you cannot be ostentatious. You must treat this like a real-life mission and collaborate as a team. Okay, guys, get the target and come see me at the rope walking training ground at around midnight, but keep in mind that you cannot tell anyone about your mission or be caught doing it. He encouraged the boys by saying, don't think the Hokage will slack just because you're kids, and then left them to plot. Naruto turned to his teammates after Mizuki left, grinning broadly. This'll be the easiest mission ever, guys, he exclaimed, giving them a thumbs up. I'm not sure, Naruto. We already passed his stupid test today. All we have to do tomorrow is jutsu that I've already mastered, Kiba thought, rubbing his chin in contemplation. It sounds really difficult. Shikamaru nodded and said, yeah, going after this scroll thing or whatever is too troublesome, before yawning and leaving a dejected Naruto behind as Kiba played with his pet dog. You jerks, I don't need you guys anyway, he said sternly, turning inward. I'll get the scroll myself and quickly become Hokage. Iruka was standing there when Naruto approached the door bearing this thought in mind. Well, are you going somewhere? As Naruto opened his mouth to say he was heading home, Iruka slapped his forehead with a sticky tag labeled, double detention. I didn't think so, Naruto. Iruka wasn't really coming into the room, so Naruto scowled and went back to his seat. He took his book out of his pouch and began chapter 30, which was a quarter of the way through the thick book. Geez. I can't do this kind of training in just another 30 minutes, he complained, looking up at the clock. The husky voice of a young kunoichi said, "Sure you can, Naruto-kun," and Naruto turned to face the window where Ino had been moments earlier. With his transformations, Naruto had attracted the attention of several girls, including Ino, Hinata, who had always given him her full attention, and Mixing, who was 2 years older than Naruto but hadn't been able to graduate yet because she had consistently failed the final exams, with the exception of this year, when she had finally mastered all of the jutsu and her aim was good enough to strike bullseye on the targets. She had flawless alabaster skin, moderate C-cup breasts, long black hair that fell to her lower back, and always wore Chinese dresses with high-cut splits that showed off her legs. As an orphan without a family name or clan, she had sworn her eternal devotion to Naruto and became what she called the first member in his clan's junior branch. She was short, barely taller than Naruto himself, and had a bright smile that mirrored Naruto's. She was a failure of failures and had even seen other failures move past herself, but unlike the others, Naruto had encouraged her and even helped her with her chakra. Although his chakra control sucked nearly as bad as hers, until recently. Among the 5 classmates and the Hokage he could now call friends, Naruto most enjoyed Meishing's company. He looked up at the young kunoichi in training and smiled broadly. "Hey, what are you doing here? You ought to be studying for the tests tomorrow, don't you? No matter what, you and I must pass." Mixing grinned warmly at Naruto, taking pleasure in his vivacious nature. "Oh, I'm practicing," she said. She smiled proudly and acknowledged, "The me you see is a clone I learned from Sandaime-sama." When Naruto approached the window and looked out, he scowled. The blonde boy sighed, "Man, I gotta learn to keep my trap shut," as he looked at the clock on the front of the classroom, which caused Mixing to giggle softly and melodiously. "What the devil would make you want to do that? You're special and always speak from the heart," she said as she entered the room, adding, "And if you hadn't let your words flow, I never would have gotten your support choosing one of Naruto's favorite characters." She informed him, "I'd be failing my 3rd attempt and forced to live a civilian life like Ayame-chan." "Mixing-chan," Naruto said, shaking his head and exhaling deeply, before his eyes clouded over and a terrible smirk appeared on his face, promising a great deal of pain and humiliation. "How would you like to assist me in pulling off the ultimate prank on Mizuki-sensei and Iruka-sensei?" Mixing looked back, and as the two rubbed their hands together in mischief, the room appeared to drop 10 degrees. "I'm all for a prank," Mixing said. She sat on the edge of Naruto's desk and asked, "What are you thinking of, Naruto-kun?" "Well, since Iruka-sensei ruined my last prank by breaking the 4th wall, I think we need something that will make him tremble and never want to get involved with us again," Naruto thought as his mind raced. Leaning back and staring up at the ceiling, he balanced his chair on its back legs and hovered there in place. "Since you're just going to sit there thinking, why don't you tell me why you didn't Ino, Hinata, or myself to join you in painting the Hokage monument?" Mixing sighed, crossing her arms beneath her growing bust and gazing at Naruto's whiskered face. "I don't know," Naruto said, shrugging as he glanced down his nose at the Chinese girl. "It never occurred to me that you guys would want to get into any real trouble, and vandalism is a serious offense," he said in a rare display of intelligence. He observed, "Unlike me, you all have some semblance of a family to chastise you." Hovering over the younger boy, Mixing sighed and said, "Naruto, I'm just as much of an orphan as you are." According to Naruto, she confessed with excessive joy that she didn't even have a family name. You're an Uzumaki, even if it's just a name given to you by the council. It entails you to certain rights," she said. "Well, I haven't really thought that line out, so I don't know where I was going with that," she said sweetly, pausing to knock on the side of her head and sticking her tongue out. At the revelation, Naruto stumbled and fell onto his back, exclaiming, "Oof!" Sitting up on the ground in lotus position, arms crossed over his chest, he leveled a glare on the girl. "So, I'm an Uzumaki." As his posture eased, he complained sternly, "I've never heard of them before, and nobody in the school seems willing to teach me about them. As far as I'm concerned, I might as well be the first of my name." "Naruto-kun, don't waste your time on things like that," Mixing said, laughing at Naruto's expression when his eyes narrowed and he pouted. He truly did look like a plump fox. "Remember that I am your servant? I'll do everything you ask me to the best of my ability," she said with pride. "Yeah, you keep saying that, but what the hell does that even mean?" Naruto sighed and shook his head as he stood up. He acknowledged, "I've never had a servant before, much less seen what other clans do with them." Mizuki smirked as he walked into the room and saw Mixing and Naruto. "Hey kids," he said politely. Waving his hand, Naruto swallowed uneasily, and Mixing tried to hide behind her own skin. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said. "I won't tell anyone that you sneaked into detention. Mixing, and Iruka has already left for home. Remember this well, Teamwork is the most vital thing a ninja can have, Mizuki said, holding up a hand to prevent Mixing and Naruto from standing up after they both appeared to relax at the announcement. His eyes held a dangerous light that neither child had ever seen before. I'll let you fill Mixing in and give you the opportunity to collaborate in order to complete this unique test because I know you can't rely on Kiba or Shikamaru. Don't tell anyone else. Though, got it? With deathly low tones, his intent to kill slowly seeping out, he asked. To Mizuki's astonishment, neither Naruto nor Mixing appeared to sense his intention to kill, and they turned to smile at each other as Naruto enthusiastically described the covert graduation mission. So, all we gotta do is get past Gigi and take the scroll from him, Naruto exclaimed, grinning broadly and giving a thumbs up. Mixing narrowed her eyes and thought this mission was odd, but after thinking about the fact that she was this year's dead last instead of a complete failure once more, she decided that she truly had no idea how these things worked, so she nodded her head in agreement. Sadly, the children were just that, children who were trusting an authority figure too easy, he thought to himself, but remember, bring it to the training grounds where we practiced rope walking by sunrise. Mizuki could not have been more obvious if he had held out a sign that indicated his lying setup while grinning. As each teen's thoughts turned to finally graduating and moving on with their lives, Naruto nodded proudly and sped out of the classroom and into the hallways, Mixing on his heels. Leaning against a wall across the street from the academy, Sasuke's side Naruto, the former two-time failure, was running from the school. He had somehow gone from being a failure to the top of the class in ninjutsu and taijutsu, with scores that were only marginally lower than Sasuke's. Sasuke was unsure of why things had changed for the Uzumaki this year. Naruto, enjoy your moment of thinking you're as good as me, Sasuke said, narrowing his eyes as he thought about what might have been going on to enable such a skill increase in just 1 year. A group of giggling girls arrived just as Sasuke disappeared in a shushin. I'll take you down first, then I'll kill him, he thought to himself, his eyes shifting his Sharingan, revealing 2 tomo on each eye. I'll master these eyes by tomorrow and show you what a true genius can do. Where has Sasuke disappeared to? He's really attractive and enigmatic. Yeah. Pulling a wolf Anbu mask from his face, Kakashi sighed and gazed into a mirror, his sullen, exposed eyes staring back at himself. You'll get your chance tomorrow, he said. His black cloak fluttered as he emerged from the restroom and made his way to a group of 4 other Anbu, his squadmates. I just hope that he's not as bad as everyone says, he said, before pulling the mask back over his face. A genin squad will be assigned to me the day after tomorrow. I anticipate Tenzo taking over the squad if they do end up passing, he declared firmly. I'll do as you say, Senpai, Tenzo said reverently as the 4 shuffled and he nodded his head. We've been given a mission on the edge of fire, bordering rain, Kakashi said, holding up a scroll for everyone to see before copying it and distributing it. The 5 disappeared in Shunshin and sped off. There's been talk of foot traffic in that region, even a few rain ninja coming out, he said. We don't have much time to get there and for me to return, so let's get a move on, he said. While Mixing sat backwards in a rolling chair and gazed at her self-appointed master, Naruto sat on his bed. Grr, I can't think of anything really good to beat Gigi, Mixing said. He complained and collapsed back on his bed, saying, he's just too strong and quick to beat up. When he heard a muffled mewl, he turned slightly to the right and saw a cat curled up in his sheets. Hey Tora, he said softly, and the cat gave him a gentle yawn. Naruto smiled at the screen. His small orange cat with black stripes looking just like a tiger. As Naruto held the slack-legged animal above his head, it hung there like a loose noodle, and Mixing grinned at the sight. Hey Naruto, how about some Sunter? Underground, huh? After struggling to remember the correct word, she paused and finally said, you know that thing where it's underneath the underneath, giving up on remembering the word. I understand what you mean, but Ino and Hinata are the book-smart ones. Naruto scowled. However, how will that support our mission? Mixing gave a cute little scowl that looked like a little pout. Well, what if we looked like someone he wouldn't see? Naruto turned to face the girl and smiled, saying, hey, I'm great at henge. It was a devil's smirk if Mixing ever saw one, and it made her heart skip a beat to think that she had put it on his face. Have I mentioned the Oiroke no Jutsu to you before? Mixing gazed incredulously at Naruto, saying, Oiroke? Are you really a pervert, Naruto? The cat landed on Naruto's face and remained there, purring contentedly. I'm not a pervert. In any case, he concluded, recalling the steps he had taken to become proficient in the technique. But Mixing was intrigued by this line. Hey, Naruto through a cat's body. How are you able to communicate clearly? She had heard of elite ninjas doing this, but Naruto didn't seem like a very high-ranking individual to her. Hey, that underneath the underneath thing just might work, Naruto said. ignoring the girl's questioning utterly. Gigi's an old pervert and I'll bet I can knock him out with a nosebleed. Naruto sat up, slid the protesting cat off its perch, and looked into Mei Xing's eyes, his own eyes sparkling with laughter. Mixing sighed, her eyes sad. Just ignore my question, she said. Hey, I'll teach you my incredibly powerful jutsu and I'll need your assistance. As he said this, Naruto jumped up and started grabbing magazines and posters from all over his room. Yes, this one will do, he thought, glancing at one magazine before moving on to another. The sheer number of magazines Naruto was pulling out caused Mixing to blink a few times. Naruto, where did you get all of these and why haven't I seen them? She asked. I clean your room every day, and pulled out a magazine that featured a girl with long red hair playing with two-bladed yo-yos while wearing skin-tight brown leather clothing. Well, I didn't want Ino to find out I had these, Naruto said, smiling as he looked up at the girl. Imagine what she would be like if she read some of these things on how to actually seduce guys, he said, smirking, adding that she was already awful enough. I see your point, Mixing said, laughing at the idea and nodding her head. Yes, the blonde girl was a tease and could make even some of the village's adult men blush, but she wasn't yet ready for true seduction now. Why are you showing me these in particular? I'm gonna teach you my own version of henge, Naruto said with a proud nod and a thumb raised, his hand positioned sideways like a painter evaluating a scene. But, henge is genjutsu, and you still suck at high-level chakra control like that, Mixing said, blinking and glancing at the boy. Considering that the girl had just disparaged his abilities, Naruto nodded enthusiastically. That's true, but I made henge into a ninjutsu. A ninjutsu, Mixing mouthed, attempting to comprehend the concept. You mean, a real metamorphosis? Naruto nodded with pride, saying, it wasn't easy and I'm not sure if it would hold up to a medical exam or not, but I looked the part. Before he hand-sealed and changed, the room was filled with smoke, making it impossible to see anything and making Mixing wave her hand around. Jutsu no Oiroke. The smoke gradually faded until Mixing could see a cute blonde girl, her naughty bits barely concealed by the smoke wafts as she winked and blew a kiss at Mixing, after Mixing had unsuccessfully searched the smoke for the source of the voice. Words seemed to fail Mixing as her mind short-circuited, leaving her with nothing to do but stare dumbly as she turned pale and pointed at the girl. She looked about 16 years old, and aside from the whisker marks, Mixing would never have thought the much taller girl was Naruto. So, what do you think? Asked the cute female voice, her twin blonde pigtails reaching her ankles. Even the feel of chakra in the girl flowed slightly differently, the difference being what it felt like to be around another girl instead of a boy. That's Naruto, this is incredible, she asked herself, how did you do this? As she started to circle Naruto, shoving aside the modesty clouds to make sure that every component was in its proper place. As Mixing squeezed her breasts, Naruto flushed. Well, Mixing-chan, don't you think that sounds a little familiar? She inquired. Mixing gave the blonde girl a charming frown as she looked up at her. So you can even feel everything? She inquired. Nodding, Naruto let go of the just you and reverted to his short self, wearing a white t-shirt with a spiraling sun on the chest and gray shorts. Yeah, and the best part is, unlike a genjutsu, the jutsu does not need chakra to be fed once it is initiated. He pointed a finger up as though lecturing, adding, so even if you get knocked out and captured, no one will know who you really are. Mixing gave a nod, saying, this jutsu one fear had always been present in her thoughts. If you could tech it to all the kunoichi, we could move through villages as men and not have to worry about the more sordid details of capture and investigation, she thought. Sure, I guess, Naruto said, looking at the girl bewildered and scratching his forehead. However, he questioned, why would you want to be a guy for Oiroke? Not the pervy jutsu in particular, but the use of a real transformation could be used for just about anything, Mixing explained, shaking her head as she leapt onto the bed, tackled Naruto's cat, and rolled onto her back with the adorable creature on her belly before turning to face Naruto. Anyway, you have to learn the Oiroke today to pull off the plan tonight, Naruto confirmed with a head nod, shrugging, still not fully grasping what she might have meant. Mixing agreed, grinning at the beast on her stomach. Okay, where do I begin? She responded, I saw the hand seal, but I've only ever used it for the genjutsu version. Despite their limited knowledge, Naruto and Mixing soon found themselves discussing the theory and dynamics of the jutsu. As the two girls walked into the flower shop together, Ino turned to face Hinata and said, hey, Hinata, to what extent do you genuinely enjoy Naruto? Glowing an atomic red, Hinata looked at Ino askance, scandalized as she was, and stumbled as she entered the doorway, barely avoiding the edge of a shelf to preserve her dignity. You in Ino-san? Naruto. As Hinata abruptly lasted the entire previous year of corrected speech and confidence, Ino grinned and nodded. I see, did you tell him yet? Words seemed to elude Hinata, but she managed to shake her head. I indeed, but, he. Hinata, we've got to get you ready to really talk to Naruto, outside of just training, Ino added as an afterthought after noticing that Hinata had been speaking to Naruto when she was stopped in her protest. Hinata closed her mouth and let her shoulders drop. That can wait for a little while. Ino sighed as she watched her friend continue to stammer. Hey, with whom do you think we'll be paired? Finally, Hinata was able to speak without stuttering, saying, I'm not sure, but I doubt we'll be with Naruto at all, with a glum admission. With an eyebrow raised, Ino asked, why would you say that? Because of our family traits, Hinata said, continuing to follow Ino through the store until they came out in the back where a training ground was set up. Despite our exceptional taijutsu skills, our Kekkei Genkei will be taken into account in terms of my Byakugan. I'm a sensor in order to protect me while I serve as a scout. I'll most likely be assigned to a squad of trackers or heavy defense fighters, she said. With a defeated sigh, Ino nodded and said, darn, you ruined my good time. She acknowledged that she had hoped to be paired with Naruto and Sasuke-kun, asking, can you imagine what it would be like to be surrounded by so much manliness? When Hinata saw the hearts floating in Ino's eyes, she shook her head. But you're correct, I'll be stuck with Shikamaru and Choji because of my clan history and family ability. There are moments when I wish this village would abandon such archaic customs. Who do you believe will be paired with Naruto and Sasuke, then? I'm not so sure that they will even be on the same team, Hinata said, scowling at the blonde. The boy's Rookie of the Year was Sasuke. That team typically consists of the girl's Rookie of the Year and the dead last. I can't see Naruto on the same team as Sasuke because he's a mid-range student who is only a few points behind him in the physical arts and far behind him in his studies, she said. You're really killing my buzz here, Hinata, Ino said, sighing and holding her chin in her hand while striking an overly feminine pose. You're telling me that neither of us will even have the opportunity to be on Naruto's team, and that Sakura will always be on Sasuke's team? She inquired. With a nod, Hinata said, Mixing is this year's dead last, so she'll be there to interrupt Sasuke and Sakura for you if that makes you feel better. Great, so my best friend and my biggest rival are going to be on the same team as the village heartthrob and I'll be stuck with two useless idiots. Ino sagged in defeat as he sat on a log. She threw her hands in the air and complained, this better not interfere with my training. With a quiet giggle, Hinata teased, well, if you really want to get better, you should hurry and finish chapter 3. Taking out her copy of the updated training manual Naruto had written for the girls, which included more details about Kata's flow and special notes about how he overcame obstacles after a full year of training under Naruto. Hinata herself had reached chapter 7. Yeah, I've gotta get this mastered, Ino nodded and stood, her body moving through the second kata with pure taijutsu as her body took over again, allowing her mind to incorporate bursts of chakra. Don't be so hard on yourself, Hinata said with a warm smile. Your chakra pool slowness isn't really your fault. Remember, I took 6 months myself. Those chakra building exercises in the book are so much better than anything the academy could teach us, Ino thought proudly as she continued to flash through strikes, increasing in intensity as more and more battle aura pumped through her. Her supply was decent when she started, good even for a low-level chunin, and she had amazing control over it, but it had taken the majority of the school to boost her reserves in order to even reach her current chapter. But now that her reserves had increased tenfold, she was only just as strong as Sasuke, meaning that although she could execute the second kata, a full training day would leave her unconscious for almost 2 days. Ino wondered for the first time how much chakra Naruto actually possessed. With a freshly installed artificial waterfall next to her, Hinata assumed the lotus position. It was crucial to have flowing water close by when working on their aura because it could easily overheat the person receiving training. As her chakra poured out, pumping freely from every external tenketsu, Hinata's skin turned dark, and with each breath, a palpable white steam started to roll from her mouth, eyes, and nose. A pair of eyes revealed patches of unshaded grass, and a sinister, fanged mouth smirked and widened to a snarling roar. Pure chakra danced in the air like the fires of hell, swirling up and down the Hyuga's form and ringing out like the toll of a heavy bell. The steam gushing from her mouth formed a shadow in line with the shadow on the ground, and the shadow started to cast a palpable light and exploded outward, resembling a wildfire. With a loud gasp, Hinata broke out of her trance, her skin literally burning from the moisture as she jumped under the running water, her body hissing like a hot iron. I almost had it, she whispered, and Ino didn't notice as she carried on with her lethal dance. Sniggering as he absorbed the image of mixing, Naruto suppressed a laugh and said, I can't believe you did that, haha. It's not funny, Naya. Mixing half meowed in frustration, her attractive features perfectly matching the male fantasy of a furry catgirl as she pouted and propped her hands on her hips. Mixing, who was wearing a cat's tail, a body of orange fur, and cat ears on top of her head, frowned cattily. Naruto completely lost it and collapsed to the ground, holding his sides as he pointed. Naruto couldn't say much, but he looked up and pointed once more. With a deep rumbling growl, Meishing's tail swished from side to side. "Help me out figure out how to change back, Naya," she grunted, not entirely pleased with her outcome. Finally controlling his laughter, Naruto asked, "Why the hell did you try transforming with Tora-chan anyway?" As his laughter came to a close. "I heard guys like catgirls, Naya, so I thought I would see if it worked," Mixing whimpered as she walked over to the bed and sat down, her tail twitching softly. As the girl mewed once more, Naruto forced himself to suppress a laugh. "Have you attempted to separate using the henge again?" Mixing smiled as she looked up in surprise, saying, "No, Naya." It was a little more smoky than before, but the lone catgirl found herself and Tora as two distinct beings. "Yay, Naya!" Tora exclaimed before meeting Naruto's gaze. The girl folded her hands into the seal with vigor and visualized herself and cat as separate creatures. Meanwhile, Mixing curled into a ball on the bed and stretched like a normal cat, falling back asleep. "Ha ha 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 ha," as the cat exclaimed, "Naya, Naruto-kun, don't laugh." Naruto left the cat, girl, alone because it took several hours to get Mixing back to normal, and Tora appeared happy to stay in her form for the time being. Mixing scowled at the happy animal before turning to face the blonde boy. "All right, I think I've got it now, so should we go to the Hokages now?" "Yeah." Naruto smiled and gave a thumbs up. "This is going to be fantastic," he exclaimed. "Just keep in mind that we need to move very quickly. It makes no difference if you're quiet and someone notices that you're slow. People tend to ignore things that you knock over and get out of dodge quickly enough," he said. Mixing gazed at Naruto in wonder, as this would be the first time he would let him play a cunning prank on her, and she was astounded by how well versed in escape tactics he was. "How about our escape plan?" she inquired. "They always emphasize in Academy how important it is to plan an escape route," she said. Naruto thumbed his nose and grinned, saying, "I don't need one," he wisely said. "Once we get the scroll, everyone is going to be after us, so we run until we lose them. If you get cornered, use a kawarimi and henge into someone no one will notice," he continued, opening the window of his bedroom. Mixing whispered to herself, "I can do this," as she followed Naruto to the open glass and gazed into the night, her heart pounding. "Yeah, let's show everyone what we're made of," Naruto said with a confident smile and a hand on her shoulder. "Together, you and I," he exclaimed. "We'll kick ass and take names." "All right, let's get going," Mixing said, sounding much more confident than she actually was. Without any further encouragement, Naruto bounded off across the rooftops, his orange-on-orange jumpsuit concealed in the last of the day's twilight. Mixing grinned and jumped out as well, hurrying to catch up to Naruto. Sume Inuzuka was standing in a stall when she looked up and saw a couple of children running overhead. "Damn kids," she said as she reflected on Naruto's parents with affection. She thought, "I bet that Naruto is taking her on a date." Shuza Akamichi was strolling through town with his son, eating his own favorite snack, when he noticed the two speeding along. "Hey, isn't that Naruto and the dead last girl?" he asked his son. Sume wasn't the only one who noticed the pair. As he shoved yet another handful of chips into his mouth, Shoji nodded and said, "Yes, they spend a lot of time together. I believe it's because they were both on the verge of dropping out this year or because they are orphans. I don't really understand," he shrugged. "You'll understand when you get a bit older, son," Shuza said. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, he said, "I just hope Naruto isn't up to anything dangerous tonight," then shrugged and left. Special Junin Anko Midarashi narrowed her eyes when she saw Naruto bringing an accomplice with him. This should be entertaining, she thought as she looked at the two of them. Although she had never met Naruto, she had seen his face a lot, but the blonde hair on his head was a dead giveaway. She smirked slyly and followed him as stealthily as she could, moving through the village in the shadow of the two children. Naruto and Mixing landed on the awning beneath the Hokage's office window. After a few minutes of jumping, the blonde boy smiled widely and motioned for his subordinate to follow him. He leaned up over the window's edge and saw his target filling out paperwork while he struggled to fall asleep. He dropped back down and turned to face Mixing, whose eyes mirrored Naruto's. "He's in there and not really paying any attention," Naruto said excitedly. Only a shadowed Anko saw the two teenagers leap through the window and rush Hiruzen. "Gigi, I need your forbidden scroll," he yelled, challenging the man, making him stop. He started to say, "My forb," but Naruto interrupted him with a right fist that caused the Hokage to jump away. He then flashed his hands through seals to conjure two binding gates that pinned Mixing and Naruto to the ground. "What's all this about, Naruto?" He inquired curiously. He could have easily captured Naruto, but he didn't want to harm the boy. As he struggled to move, Naruto looked up, his tongue sticking out from the side of his mouth. "Just tell me where it is," he begged. Catching Hiruzen's eyes moving slightly in the direction of a secret vault, Naruto poofed into smoke, exposing a log, his eyes gleaming with mischief. When Hiruzen turned on his heel, he heard twin voices and saw Mixing using the same move, Oiroku no Jutsu. "Oh, Gigi, you make me so excited." The old man looked up into the eyes of a busty blonde girl with twin pigtails, her beautiful blue eyes sparkling with mirth as she hugged the fossil to her breasts. He felt his face meet something soft and warm as he finished his turn. A tall, lean woman with long, flowing raven black hair slipped up against Hiruzen's back, her onyx eyes on the edge of his vision as she squeezed her bare breasts into his back and purred sensuously into the old man's ear. "The way you make feel when you touch my body. I imagine Rei Hino from Sailor Moon as compared to Naruto being a play on of Usagi Sakino." This world wasn't long for Hiruzen, who fell to the ground in a flurry of blood. "Ah!" exclaimed Naruto as he took a huge scroll from the safe that should never have fit in the tiny storage device. "I've got it, now let's go before the Anbu find us." He cheered loudly. The two snickered as they headed to a vault and opened it. Oddly enough, it wasn't locked, and they were searching through the scrolls inside. Mixing gave a nod and hurried after Naruto as he left the office. As she played with a kunai in her hand and narrowed her eyes dangerously, Anko followed along. "What's going on here?" she wondered as she ran after the children. Alarms didn't go off for another 10 minutes, and during that time, Anko had followed Naruto and Mixing into the woods quite a distance from the main village. Naruto held the scroll against a dilapidated old shack and smiled maniacally as he and Mixing paused to catch their breath. He thought, "Hey, I wonder what's inside," as he began to unfold the scroll. Mixing sat beside him and watched, looking somewhat thoughtful. "Kage Bunshin." Naruto sighed as he read the description. "I'm terrible at clones." He shrugged and handed the scroll to Mixing. "Wow, there's a lot of jutsu in here," the Chinese girl said in amazement as she began to pull the scroll further back while rubbing her chin thoughtfully. As he formed the seal for it, Naruto shrugged and stood up straight. "I'm gonna try this shadow clone thing," he said, adding, "Too bad Ino's not here. She's fast at learning these jutsu," as a cloud of smoke filled the air, leaving everyone with obscured vision. "Cough, cough. I can't see anything anymore, Naruto," Mixing groaned, waving pointlessly at the sky. Since it wouldn't do to be noticed and there were almost 100 copies, the special Junin wasn't about to take any chances, so Anko, who was hidden, narrowed her eyes when she saw one of Naruto's clones only 5 feet away. Her kunai swiftly slashed out and destroyed the closest thread to her. "Hey, Mixing. Take a look." The clones all cheered together. "I got it on the first try." "I think I'll keep this one," the Chinese girl said, shaking her head and examining the jutsu that was currently being used. It was extremely complicated and involved the use of seals and space-time jutsu word for word, image for image, she exclaimed. "One day I'll be a super kunoichi and I'll show everyone who's boss." "Man, I've been holding this in since we left the academy," grumbled one of the blonde boys, but Anko missed it because she was too busy avoiding a couple of clones who were chatting aimlessly while urinating in the bush beside her. A second responded, "I know, tell me about it," as he positioned himself. The kunoichi paled and then stabbed the clone in the middle of a sentence after a third wandered over to where Anko was hidden and pulled down his trousers. "I don't know what you," he said before turning to smoke. "What's his deal?" the other two asked, shrugging their shoulders. "Perhaps an unstable matrix?" That was far too close, Anko sighed softly. "Next," he called out, whining, "I have no idea what the use of this jutsu is if you can't just pop them all at once." In another scene, Naruto was using sticks to poke his clones in order to pop them. With a gentle smile on her round face, Mixing said, "Another 6 hours until sunrise, then we can turn in the scroll," while joyfully humming a song to herself and gazing at the bustling village. Naruto smiled as he turned to face the girl, asking, "What would you like to do in the interim?" Mixing got up and walked cautiously around the deserted shack while humming softly to herself. Naruto, when she noticed the blonde about to yell about becoming the Hokage, she interrupted her question to ask, "What do you want more than anything? I mean, other than being Hokage? Do you want to become a well-known S-class ninja or rebuild the Uzumaki clan?" she thought. After giving the question some thought, Naruto said, "I'm not really sure." He shrugged lightly and said, "I don't know what a clan is good for, but I'll be famous for sure." He boastfully declared, "I'll be the strongest ninja ever," but Mixing had faith in him. "Whatever you decide, Naruto," she said, her eyes full of admiration. "I know I say this all the time, but if it weren't for you," she said, staring at the blonde boy with her onyx eyes as she watched the words pass through his head. "This year, I would have dropped out for that. I owe you a life debt," she cursed. After giving the girl a nod, Naruto drew a kunai and cut his palm. "On my own blood. I swear I'll never leave you behind, Mixing," he said solemnly. As the atmosphere grew quiet, Naruto spoke once more, saying, "What I really want is a horse so I can finally start the second book," he thought. Meishing's eyes glazed over in contemplation after she giggled at the idea. What if, with ideas racing through her head, she asked out loud, "What if I could transform into a horse, like I transformed into Tora-chan?" As he prodded another clone, Naruto glanced over, not really paying attention. "Huh, what was that, Mixing?" "Nothing, I'm going over here and try some of these jutsu," the girl said, waving her hand at Naruto before leaving the scroll next to Naruto and heading into the shack. When Naruto reached the final one after almost an hour of exploding clones, Anko decided it was time to seize the forbidden scroll, but she wasn't the only one to declare their arrival. Iruka's voice said, "Naruto, there you are." With relief, Anko wanted to learn the truth about whatever was happening, so he went back into hiding. Holding up the scroll, Naruto smiled. "Hey Iruka-sensei. I got the scroll, but I was waiting for daybreak to bring it to you guys," he yelled. Iruka scowled while observing the cheerful demeanor of the blonde boy. His eyes were hard as he looked at his troubled student. "What the hell are you going on about, Naruto? You stole a very important scroll from the Hokage's office and even attacked him," he said gravely. "You've got to come with me right now to give that scroll back." Naruto scowled. "But, what about the mission? Mizuki-sensei told me I was chosen to perform it this year," he yelled in response to the argument. He looked at his teacher as he reached to his side and picked up the scroll. "If I don't bring it to him, I won't graduate," he yelled, his eyes hard. Iruka scratched in amazement at his neck. "Secret mission? I wasn't told anything about it, and I'm the one who oversees mission assignments, Naruto." A husky but loving voice said, "Hey Naruto, you actually did it," as Mizuki emerged from a tree branch, outfitted for battle with his hand outstretched. The recently arrived Chunin dictated, "Iruka simply has no idea what's happening. Hokage-sama was quite impressed with your performance. Now hand over the scroll and we'll get you graduated." Naruto scowled and cast bewildered glances at his two kind instructors. "Wait, something's not adding up here. You guys always know what's going on together. Why doesn't Iruka-sensei know what's going on?" Mixing was still hidden inside the shack, her eyes speculatively peeping around the corner. She was terrible at fighting, but she wanted to be by Naruto's side if it came down to it. Her best chance was to create a distraction that would allow Naruto to get away. She prepared for hand seals by stretching her fingers. Outside, Naruto listened with concern as his teachers threw insults at one another. Mizuki's face darkened as he yelled, "Why would you listen to Iruka? He's lying to you just like everyone in this village has always lied to you." Iruka yelled at Mizuki, "No, don't you dare. It's forbidden by the Hokage," with increasing alarm. A huge windmill shuriken that sailed aimlessly was thrown at Naruto by Mizuki. Iruka appeared in front of him, trying to protect the boy. As the blonde's eyes widened, Iruka pulled away from Naruto and turned to see something he had never thought about before. After a few moments of silence and painlessness, a green hue of energy rose from Naruto's body and seeped from his tenketsu and facial orifices as he started to smoke. As chakra poured out of him, Iruka saw the windmill shuriken, held high by pure chakra and floating in the air as electricity crackled, as his orange jumpsuit billowed in an unseen wind, and he turned to see Mizuki's shocked face. Naruto's voice was an even bigger surprise than that. With his voice transformed into a deep baritone and his chakra causing the air to vibrate, the blonde asked, "What secret, Mizuki-sensei?" The most peculiar aspect of the scene was how Naruto's shadow began to extend along the ground, growing longer and wider until it took the shape of a demonic face. Mizuki and Anko were lifted along with Iruka to float with their limbs pulled to the limit because they were unable to escape its grasp quickly enough. As the demonic child released a kill intent that no one had felt since that night, they positioned themselves in front of him. Anko struggled to move and shivered, but her body was soon discovered to be unresponsive. A quick look at Mizuki revealed that the man had turned so pale that he looked like a ghost, but this was short-lived because he passed out. The ground crumpled beneath Naruto's foot as he took a single, lone step in the direction of the defenseless three Konoha ninja. Naruto pulled the limbs harder, tearing Mizuki to pieces and popping Iruka's arms out of their sockets. "What secret? I've had enough people telling me lies. Someone tell me the truth," he demanded. Iruka objected to Naruto's bare display of strength and questioned how long he had been keeping this a secret. Additionally, he questioned whether he had been mistaken about Naruto. Hiruzen whispered, "That's enough, Naruto, my boy." As he and Asuma entered the clearing, Naruto nodded while glancing at his grandfather figure before hurling the two ninja to the ground without fanfare. Asuma finished his crumpled cigarette and let out a burst of smoke. He grinned and said, "Naruto, that's one hell of a jutsu you've got there." Naruto let his Genma Iri fade and smiled through his Motoki cloak. "Yeah, sorry for killing Mizuki-sensei, but he did try to kill me and Iruka-sensei first, so what's this big secret, huh?" He glanced between the two of them and the pale ninja he had just let go, and both Sarutobi men grinned at the ball of energy. Hiruzen gave a quiet laugh. He smiled kindly and acknowledged, "Well, I had hoped to tell you about this a long time ago, but it appears you've pushed my hand." He called to the shack, "Meeksing, come on over here since you're his ward, I'm sure you'll need to know as well." The old man relaxed, letting go of a breath he had not realized he had been holding. To believe that Naruto has come this far already. He shook his head, thinking, "I doubt even Hinata is aware of this." Meeksing quickly made her appearance as the girl left the house after putting away her kunai and itching powder bombs weakly. She said, "Hokage-sama," standing next to Naruto. With a big smile, the blonde boy put his arm around Meishing's shoulder and threw the forbidden scroll to Asuma. "So, does that mean we passed this test?" Hiruzen looked at his son, perplexed, and raised an eyebrow. Asuma shrugged and verified that the scroll was authentic. "What test are you talking about, Naruto?" Anko started to gather her thoughts as Naruto and Meeksing discussed what Mizuki had said with the Hokage, even bringing up the fact that he had first approached Kiba and Shikamaru as well. Anko's palms appeared as pale as her former masters with her hands shaking. She asked herself, is this really the difference between a Jinchuriki and a normal ninja? Anko was able to slow the tremble somewhat by flexing her fingers, but she was unable to do more than sit in the dirt because her knees were still weak and her throat was dry. She flinched as a shadow passed over her, and she looked up into Meishing's worried eyes like a scared child. Putting a water bottle to the ninja's mouth, she gently offered, "Hey, sorry about that." Naruto doesn't usually unleash his full Genma Iri very often, and let her drink. She allowed. Its effects wear off in a few hours usually, before welcoming Iruka and returning the favor. Anko worriedly questioned, "Am I really so weak?" The girl hurried back to Naruto's side without even thinking to respond if Meeksing heard her despite her clear inability to fully comprehend Naruto or his power. Anko was adamant about learning it. She finally got a chance to glance at Naruto, who was the same vivacious blonde boy she had always seen. That boy who played tricks on the community's authority figures and ran across the village yelling at adults who mistreated him. Everyone thought that brat was a demon and a fool, but in reality, he was a monster with a chakra that might have been comparable to Hokage-sama. She was sitting with Naruto and Meeksing when the Sandaime Hokage and Asuma explained the truth about the seal and that Naruto had nothing to do with the Kyuubi who attacked. This prompted Meeksing to ask questions. With stern and determined eyes, Meeksing questioned, "Hokage-sama, I know Naruto's surname is Uzumaki, but is he really an Uzumaki or did you just tag that name onto him?" She considered this to be a crucial question, and Hiruzen could see that. The old man asked, "Can I withhold that information for the time being?" As Naruto gazed apathetically at the dirt. Meeksing gave a firm shake of her head. She said, almost in a whisper, "No, Hokage-sama, I've sworn my allegiance to Naruto, and I need to know if he might have a real family out there somewhere." As her chest constricted, finding family was every orphan's dream, someone who would love them the way they saw the other children and accept them for who they are. Taking a pipe from his cage robes, Hiruzen filled it with a small amount of tobacco. He started by saying, "The truth is," and then he turned to face his son and begged for light as his father puffed away. Asuma lit the pipe. Naruto has two parents that were exceptional. His father was the most revered ninja in this village's history, and his mother was indeed an Uzumaki, perhaps the last at that. Meeksing saw Naruto become alert and begin to pay attention. What were their names? Before putting a soft hand on the girl's head, Hiruzen gave her a smile. He exclaimed, "That's another S-class secret in the village, you see. Both of your parents were super elite ninja, even stronger than me," which caused Naruto to smile broadly. They had formidable adversaries as well to try to level the playing field. Entire nations would band together. The entire village would be pillaged if they found out that young Naruto was present. Even with his current level of strength, it was a fact of life among shinobi. Either you possessed it or you coveted it. Konoha possessed it, and everyone else coveted Naruto, both for his lineage and as a Jinchuriki for the 9 tails. Every nation out there would ally against us just to kill Naruto, Hiruzen said bluntly. "You can't even mention their names." Meeksing frowned and demanded, "Not even to just Naruto? Can you at least tell me if he's an Uzumaki? He's a blonde, and the history books only mention red hair," she said. "He's definitely an Uzumaki," Asuma said, laughing as his father let out a defeated sigh. "His mother was known as the red-hot habanero for her hair and temper," he added. Though learning about the Kyuubi was frightening, Meeksing didn't change her gaze on Naruto. She would still sacrifice herself for the boy. The blonde Uzumaki, both orphans, appeared content with the response and nodded to each other. Naruto sat on the back of Mixing, the first known ninja horse, and stroked her neck affectionately, causing the transformed kunoichi to make a soft noise. The blonde boy took a moment to examine her battle dress, which included an obsidian helmet with 3 sharp blades that raced up the center of the horse's head, a sturdy saddle with an undercoat that hung down her sides and was made of the same material as flak jackets that protected her sides. What appeared to be pant legs were cut to size on each mare's legs, and her tail was left loose to flutter as Mixing willed. Overall, her man-beast transformation was fantastic. Naruto was a little worried that his best friend had chosen to be his animal partner, but he had already learned not to take advantage of a good opportunity. The young ninja exclaimed, "You look so awesome, Mixing-chan," as he leaned forward and gave the horse a nuzzle, momentarily losing sight of the fact that she was a typical young lady. With a flush that tinted her pristine white coat of fur, the horse whispered, Naruto-kun, that is really distracting." The boy from Uzumaki rubbed his nape and laughed loudly. "Bahahaha. Who do you think our teammates will be, Mixing?" He scratched at a whisker, blushing slightly, wondering if it was Sakura-chan. With a whinny of annoyance, the horse started to trot toward the school. Mixing said rather angrily, "Honestly, Naruto-kun, I don't know what you see in her. She's rude and always hits you." Her matoki leaking from her mouth, eyes, and nose, making the otherwise beautiful warhorse look demonic. "Mama. Easy there, I can't really explain what it is about her, but she just make me feel all funny inside," he said, stroking Meixing's mane to placate the pup. The roiling red mass of chakra dissipated in the air like cigarette smoke, and the horse girl became much calmer. Mixing, a little excited by the idea, asked, "Naruto-kun, what if I chose not to become a kunoichi and just stayed as your mount?" "Huh, what do you mean?" The horse might have laughed off the idea if she had been able to see Naruto's bewildered expression, but since ignorance is bliss, she persisted. I finally found something I'm good at. You know me. I couldn't hit the broadside of the Hokage monument if I was 10 feet away, but I can use man-beast transformations at a level even the Sandaime was impressed by, she said, recalling the night before, or was this morning early? As he considered it, Naruto scowled, his eyes narrowing, and he simply relished the quiet ride while a number of onlookers watched the odd sight of the boy in an orange jumpsuit mounted on an armored horse. They didn't care that the horse was talking because they were used to seeing talking animals in this area. Following a brief stroll, the 2 ninja orphans arrived at the academy, where Naruto leapt down, his thoughts still focused on Mixing as his beast partner. As Naruto stood next to the horse, she twisted her chakra and changed back into her human form. Her saddle blanket combination changed into a lava that was twisted around her upper body and tied in a knot between her breasts. Her horse-shaped helmet was placed beneath her right arm, and the legs of her pants were resized to fit her new size and became a long flowing skirt. Mixing shook her head to savor the human sensation again and let her hair fall freely down her back as usual. As the 2 came in, Ino yelled, "Naruto-kun, where you last night?" With a frustrated look on her face, Hinata waved affectionately at the soon-to-be graduates who had just arrived at her side. "Hinata and I waited for you at the Hokage monument for hours." Naruto rubbed the back of his head and smiled sheepishly. He prayed for a miracle and said, Would you believe me when I said that Mixing and I both learned some awesome new jutsu and that Mizuki-sensei tried to set me up for a huge crime?" Ino could occasionally be a little too nosy. As everyone in the classroom gaped at Naruto and Mixing, they burst out laughing. Mixing came back with her arms crossed and said, "See, told you they would never buy it." It appeared as though Naruto had swallowed a lemon. He complained pathetically, they didn't have to laugh so hard. Instead, when Ino finally stopped laughing, she sat down as usual and began chatting with Sakura and Hinata. Naruto complained as he made his way to his desk, then stopped to give Sasuke a fierce look. I can't wait until I can show off my awesome new jutsu and kick your ass with it," Naruto exclaimed, using his arm muscles to demonstrate his excitement. Sasuke narrowed his eyes and looked at Naruto as though he were seeing a bug that needed to be squashed. "Idiot." Naruto roared, "What was that? You want to go right now?" His eyes glowing red as his chakra began to leak from his orifices. "No one calls me idiot, you idiot." The 2 squared off, not for the first time this school year, as Sasuke gave a stern glare and rose from his desk. Blood was pulsing loudly and all eyes were fixed on the top-marked Taijutsu students as they got ready for combat. Naruto gritted his teeth like a snarling bull as Sasuke took an aggressive stance and slid his sandal-clad feet across the ground. Sasuke struck Naruto with a barrage of punches faster than any of the students in the class could follow. Naruto returned the attack with a few chakra-enrouted blows, each of which the Uchiha avoided. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Sasuke fainted, striking Naruto in the face before launching a kick that knocked Naruto down despite the pain. The blonde held onto the leg and punched Sasuke in the solar plexus with a rabbit punch that broke bones. The boy exploded into a ruined log, much to Naruto's dismay as Sasuke led with a sideways aerial double kick. Naruto moaned, spinning to his backside and crossing his arms. "Kawarimi," he said. When Naruto flashed his hands through the seals for the coup de grace, Sasuke did not anticipate a smirk. Instead, he had anticipated a block, possibly even a counter. Indeed, he was caught off guard by Naruto's second kick, which sent him sprawling across the room. "Gah," Sasuke said with a grimace as he spat up some blood. He turned to face Naruto and his eyes changed to show a Sharingan with a single tomo. "That's it, you're dead, Naruto." As the two boys charged, Naruto yelled back, "Kiss my ass, Sasuke," in challenge. A flutter of black fabric and a flash of movement revealed a tall man wearing an Anbu uniform, his mask a Chinese dragon's face, standing between the two, easily holding each back. The Anbu ruled, "A good display of Taijutsu, let's see your ninjutsu now," and threw the boys away, causing them to crash back first into a wall. Naruto grinned and flashed through hand seals. He yelled, "Sweden. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 1. While creating a water clone, it wasn't exactly a shadow clone or a Mizubunshin, but it was completely original, solid, and enhanced by an elemental manipulation. The technique of manipulating water caused Dragon's eyes to widen. Even though it was only a B-rank jutsu, Naruto's ability to use an element was shocking, especially considering that the previous night he had been there with the Hokage and had just learned the base form Kage Bunshin. Sasuke, not to be outdone, attempted a Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu by flashing through the hand seals, but the Anbu swiftly stopped him. "So a water style and a fire style going at each other, it makes sense," he said, placing his hand on Sasuke's shoulder. Naturally, he might have respected the boy a little more if he had discovered that Naruto was a wind type in reality, despite using Sweden because the girls around him did. The two boys glared at each other, but regrettably, they were not in the mood for praise. "Well, since your teachers, both Iruka and Mizuki, are not here at present, I guess that leaves just me to grade you children." In light of this, Dragon took a clipboard from his Anbu cloak and checked off Sasuke and Naruto's Taijutsu and ninjutsu skills. He declared jokingly, "Well, you two are done, go home." But when the boys tried to object, he displayed the slightest hint of murderous intent, bringing the children to their knees, clenching his own chest and eyes wide. Inu rubbed the back of his head shamelessly as he gave in. "I suppose that was still a little much, huh?" As the fighting pair stayed pinned to the ground, Kakashi turned to face the other students in the silent class. Taking pleasure in their nervous gulping and wriggling in their seats under his scrutiny, he said, "Now that the excitement is over," and then he called on each student individually. Behind his mask, he yelled, "Mixing, I'm sorry, there's an edit in here, Uzumaki Mixing." With obvious confusion as the class's dead last made her way up a little tensely, he wondered, did something happen with Naruto without my knowledge? She was easily 15 and probably making her last attempt to pass the academy before being kicked out when Inu watched her. Her adoption of Naruto's name was noteworthy, even though she wouldn't be the first or last of the innumerable children. Mixing shuffled her feet and glanced around the room anxiously before gesturing to the Anbu to bend down to her height. The short, busty girl whispered in Inu's ear as he complied. "Oh my," he said, his mask covering his wide-open eyes. "Well, that's certainly a new one for me. Why don't you show me what you've got and I'll document you as a beast companion," he whispered to the young girl. Mixing looked around the classroom, seeing that everyone was watching her, and nodded her head. She let out a nervous sigh and formed the hand seals she had just learned to do, man-beast transformation. Mixing, dressed in armor and bristling as she shuffled in agitation, stood in a plume of smoke as a beautiful and generally healthy horse. Anyone who hadn't witnessed the girl's transformation would have assumed she was just a simple beast. Dragon ran a hand along her neck in approval and nodded his head. "This is the best beast transformation I've ever seen," he said. She whinnied and tossed her head around, ruffling her mane. "Thanks, and Busan, Sandame Sama said the same thing last night," she exclaimed. "Hey, that's our jutsu," Kiba yelled, leaping to his feet and furiously bending over his desk. Unfortunately, all of the girls in the class rushed Mixing, cooing and patting her, and Ino and Hinata were no exception, so his outburst went unnoticed. "Oh my god, you feel just like a real horse," Ino exclaimed, pressing her face against Meishing's head. As he stood among several other Junin, Dragon removed his mask to reveal a Hyuga's partially hidden face. "Well, that was a surprise, I must say," the Hyuga said, passing his clipboard of names to the Hokage. "The Sandame Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, smoked his pipe even though he was elderly and had experienced a lot of drama, love, and conflict in his life. He had never seen anything like what he and the others in the group had. When Kurenai, the scarlet-eyed genjutsu mistress, asked, so the girl has become so infatuated with Naruto that she wants to be his horse. This time was no exception to the woman's respectable demeanor and graceful movements, which always attracted the attention of her peers. She turned to face the men who were staring at her with interest. What? Asuma reached into his pack, took out a cigarette, and put it to his lips. He advised Kurenai, that Naruto, he's something different, keep a close eye on him as he grows up. After lighting the end of the stick and taking a long pull, now that everyone was watching Asuma Sarutobi, the elite Junin was accustomed to being the center of attention. He's already beyond all of these other kids, and they haven't figured it out yet, he said with pride. While Genma Shiranui chewed on a senbon, Dragon nodded his head but said nothing. He evaluated the metal needle in his mouth and said, whatever. I don't want the brat that knocked out the Hokage under me, I can say that much. A number of heads nodded. Amidst those heads, Ebisu smirked nonchalantly with his circle shades refracting light. He boldly challenged, the kid used deception to defeat the Hokage. He's not that good. Why? I bet my Konohamaru could take him with one hand behind his back. After a few quiet giggles, Shuza, with his arms folded across his barrel-shaped chest, spoke up. Normally I prefer to skip training Genin, but I think I'll toss my hat in if we're placing bets on the best brats, he said. Inoichi nodded in agreement and grinned at his good friend. Same here, old friend, he exclaimed as he moved into the middle of the Junin group. Shikaku let out a sigh. He closed his eyes and snorted, complaining, don't even think I'm gonna give up my days. I'm already busy as it is orchestrating all of the shinobi for the village. Hiruzen gave his shinobi commander a weak sigh before realizing that, for the first time in a long time, his Junin were enthusiastic about training children. Asuma moved forward as he paused to wipe his face with a cloth. Asuma smirked and said, by the way, Hokage-sama, how did Naruto get the drop on you? Information is sketchy. Cough. ERHRM, that's an S-rank secret, the man told, blushing slightly. Sume drew lead, right, as she and Kurenai gave the man a pair of smoldering glares that matched rumors. Of course they do. Ebisu adjusted his shades and said, so, how many kids do you think will graduate this year? The exams on which the academy had just gathered grades had nothing to do with his query. No, he was curious about the Junin exams, which would determine whether the children were prepared to be Genin. That was all hullabaloo and formalities. I mean, last year several Junin were left with no students, he said. Hiruzen smoked his pipe and nodded. If my hunch is correct, every student should pass their exams, even Naruto. Ebisu crossed his arms and harumphed. I don't see why you're wasting time sending him to take the exams when you've already given him a headband and assigned him a dedicated Junin instructor, he complained. As a predator corners a fat mouse, Sume smiled at the weaselly man. Ebisu was, to his credit, only mildly alarmed. My, you're getting really worked up, aren't you, Ebisu? Professionally, I don't know what you're talking about, Inuzuka-san, he denied. I just can't image myself as an elite Junin going through the Chunin exams. That must be what Naruto is feeling, he said arrogantly. Many Junin shuffled as they considered the circumstances as well, but Naruto's happiness after passing each test quickly overcame that emotion. Hiruzen was ecstatic when the day came to an end and all of the ninja prospects passed the tests in Konoha's history. This was the first year that the entire class graduated. There is one thing to say about the late traitor Mizuki and his adopted son Iruka. They were very skilled at what they did. Like Break Mixing was standing proudly over Naruto's shoulder, smiling as he gave Hinata and Ino high fives. Alright, we're finally all ninja. Let's go to Ichiraku for ramen, laughed Naruto. His enthusiasm caused the girls to giggle. Considering how much you enjoy visiting Ayame, some might assume you have a crush on her, Ino boldly teased while digging a finger into Naruto's chest. Newly christened Kunoichi rushed up to Ino, giggling. Hey, Ino, come on, we're heading to Daly's boutique for a shopping spree to celebrate our graduating, Candy said with excitement. Ino struggled to look at both groups, looking torn before slowly revealing the hand seals for his cage bunshin to her. Naruto started to snicker with a smile and a nod. Ino executed the jutsu flawlessly on her first attempt as she gave her clone a high five. She smiled and said, the benefits of excellent chakra control. She gave Naruto her wallet and said, go get something sexy for me, before turning to face him. As the laughing girls sped past, Ino turned to smile broadly at Naruto and her group of girlfriends. Well, Naruto, that's the coolest jutsu I've ever seen, she exclaimed with joy. Naruto grinned and nodded. He said, yeah it is, and then he turned to Hinata. Now you're the only one not to use it, he said somewhat gravely, seemingly challenging her to maintain her shadow clone virgin status. With a gentle smile, Hinata effortlessly produced a cage bunshin as the clone exploded. The two Hyuga girls grinned at Naruto. Both Naruto's and Meishing's eyes grew wide. Naruto exclaimed, "Why you popped it?" With alarm. "How the heck did you do that?" "I spent an hour stabbing all my clones last night," he moaned. Hinata grinned, but it appeared to be an adoring grin on her face. "I'll show you later. Naruto-kun, let's go have lunch," she said with joy. As Naruto rubbed his hands and his stomach yelled its own agreement, he immediately forgot his question. The four sped across town toward the well-liked ramen stand as if someone had fired a starting gun. The four ninja alternated between attacking and setting traps as they raced. To be honest, with so many explosions and jutsu thrown back and forth, people who were not familiar with what had become the new norm might have assumed that the ninja village was under attack. A few civilians swerved out of the way, shook their heads, and then cheered on their favorite ninja in the foot race as an earthen dragon raced through the village's streets with Ino on its head. As he twisted to avoid Hinata's juken strikes, Naruto smiled merrily. Naruto always got a natural high from dodging the girls' amazing speed bursts. Even though they hurt a lot when they connected, he jokingly exclaimed, "So close, Hinata-chan," as he just managed to avoid a palm strike. The ribbing didn't bother Hinata, who simply nodded her head and swung out more forcefully, her arms pulsing like pistons as she leapt from roof to roof after her love interest. Even as Ino threw a mud ball at them, forcing them to part ways, she vowed to herself, "I'll manage one hit today." Dislodging the kunoichi from her dragon and sending it crumbling to dust, Meising charged Ino from the side. Unfortunately, Meising was swiftly reprimanded by Ino, who was much more skilled at taijutsu. Before Meising could strike back, punches got past the Chinese girl's defenses and pounded her hard, leaving her with minor bruises. Using his motoki as sides, Naruto was able to topple Hinata and apply pressure to her shoulders, almost tearing the girl's arms off as Naruto leapt between Ino and Meising, catching both Meishing's overextended left arm with a savage smirk and one of Ino's thin legs as she attempted a kick. Blood splattered everywhere. As they realized what was going to happen, both girls went pale. Fortunately for the captive girls and unfortunately for Naruto, Hinata appeared out of nowhere, her arms a blur as she pounded Naruto until his orange jumpsuit started to smoke, then spun 420 degrees and kicked the living hell out of him, her forefoot glowing with motoki. From the belly button to the neck, Naruto was dissected, with each organ and bone carefully cut in half. At that moment, he exploded in white smoke. The three of them blinked and searched for Naruto with a huge shit-eating grin on his face. The blonde was seen waving as he leapt into the ramen stand's entrance almost a block ahead. "Bahahaha. I love cage bunshin." As they approached the stand in defeat, the three girls complained. Ino praised, nodding his head, "That was a great kick at the end there, Hinata," as the Hyuga flushed like a tomato. She whispered back, "I wasn't quick enough to catch the real Naruto though." Meising dismissed her worries with a wave. "No matter what, you saved us from turning into Swiss cheese. I hate eating ramen covered in blood," Meising said. As they entered the eatery and smelled the delicious food, Ino and Hinata silently agreed Naruto was in the faces of the three girls as soon as they walked into the establishment. "Hey, Hinata-chan, you're not hurt, are you, Ibeo?" As Naruto started stroking her body in an attempt to find any remaining wounds, the Hyuga heiress flushed in shame softly. She begged, Naruto-kun, please stop," and was able to remove the worry wart. Hinata waved her hands at the boy as the blonde Hokuto Ryukin practitioner leered at him with watery eyes. "I'm totally fine," she emphasized. With a sigh, Naruto's shoulders drooped a little. Ino said, "Geez, Naruto-kun." In a pitying tone, the blonde girl sighed and said, "You found that damn healing technique." Naruto let out a sigh. Indeed, in the book's 9th chapter, he had discovered a healing method. It described how to control one's motoki or chakra to undo physical harm. As though it had never occurred. With a sigh, Naruto gave in to his inclination to worry about his fellow practitioners' welfare. As a close-knit family, the four children were nearly yakuza in their love for one another. He was the eldest of three endearing sisters, and the thought of having a family at last warmed his heart naturally. As a young boy, Naruto was unaware of the affections showered upon him. He simply assumed the girl liked to agitate him, despite Ino's overt flirtations. Yes, that was accurate. It was enjoyable for Ino to push Naruto well beyond his comfort zone, and Hinata and, for that matter, Meising alright. So she was a little gossipy and flirted, but don't think that diminished her abilities in the slightest, let alone her love for Naruto. In the middle of Konoha's leaf, the blonde boy was now settling into a seat at the head of a special table that was divided from the rest of the restaurant by curtain walls that showed the triple swirls of Uzushiogakure. For a moment, he pushed aside the curtain to look into the rest of the room. The people around him softened their glares as they noticed the symbol on the curtain and nearly looked ashamed. He could only get that look from the older generations, those who had been ninja at least since the end of World War II, not for the first time. Naruto scowled. Even the civilians who viewed the curtain that Ino had ordered gave him disgraceful looks before leaving, especially Naruto. Naruto lowered the curtain and said, "Hey, Ino, have you discovered anything about why everyone here seems to either be sad at me displaying my clan's symbol or not recognize it at all?" Tucci had given Naruto this small section of the restaurant as a thank you for bringing so much business to his stand. It also allowed Naruto to eat in peace without being bothered by people. How did Naruto contribute to successful business? Ayame, Tucci's beautiful auburn-haired daughter, the same one Mixing had previously mentioned, pissed into the room and hurriedly gathered Mixing and Naruto in a warm embrace, with each of them having an arm looped through the other. While she giggled joyfully, she said, "I'm guessing you guys finally passed this year," with a lively and joyful tone. Ayame had accepted a life with her father and, to be honest, felt no regret about leading a civilian life. In contrast to some of the more bitter individuals who dropped out of the academy, she continued her academy training, which was already subpar because she failed, but that was more for her attractive figure. Ayame had a reputation to uphold as the village's star and 16-year-old, even if it was through making noodles. With pride, Naruto clutched his hite between his thumb and index finger. "Hell yeah," he exclaimed with pride. Mixing averted her gaze for a moment and muttered something while flushed a squeal greeted the blush. "Oh my, Mixing, you didn't," exclaimed Ayame, her eyes gleaming with knowledge. After all, Mixing had gotten the idea from Ayame's influence and cunning. Rewind. As Mixing entered the Ichiraku ramen stand, she let out a sigh. It was early. Even though it was so early that the sun was still up, she still found both of the family's custodians setting up shop. As she walked into the establishment, Mixing began cleaning tables and arranging chairs with a practiced ease. She could handle this. Tucci and Ayame glanced at the girl. Unless Tucci pushed her away, she would frequently stop by and assist with opening the establishment. Sometimes working all day, he loved the girl like a niece, so it wasn't that he didn't enjoy the company, but she was incredibly awkward and frequently broke his dishes. Ayame gave her father a look that prevented him from harassing his daughter. Ayame approached Mixing with a straightforward elegance and grace, and she hid the Chinese girl's eyes behind her. She teased, "Guess who?" fusing her voice to sound like Naruto's, one of the very abilities in which Ayame had truly excelled. Mixing smiled and turned to look at the other girl. "Morning, Ayame Nichan." The Ichiraku family was definitely awake now if they hadn't been previously. With the chairs still piled on top, Ayame escorted the year-old girl to a table. Once the two of them had placed their legs on the ground, Ayame motioned for her friend to take a seat. "So, what happened?" she asked, looking forward for something of interest. "The village was so active last night that I knew Naruto was in the center," she uncovered. To Ayame's astonishment, Mixing turned red. "A lot of things happened actually," she started, her eyes tracing the intricate details of the drawings and the patterns on the wall. "The Hokage himself ordered me to keep some of it a secret," she declared excitedly. The fact that the Hokage, had met her and Naruto and even sat down with them as if they were family still gives her a rush. Ayame gave a quiet smile. She had not yet had a personal or business meeting with the village leader. He kept to himself away from the village's leisure spots. Naruto, who spent a lot of time with the elderly man, was even luckier than Mixing. "Well, what can you tell me?" he asked. She turned into a catgirl and even a real cat as the conversation swiftly turned into girly gossip about what had happened the day before. Following a burst of laughter, Ayame's eyes glistened. Who would have thought that little Naruto would be such a deviant? "I mean, hiding so many magazines and making such a perverted jutsu," she said with a smirk. Mixing blushed slightly and gave a submissive nod. "Well, I at least learned his jutsu," she said, nodding firmly. Ayame's gaze glowed as she plotted. She noted, with that kind of transformation, you could become what Naruto's always asked for. Imagine it. Having Naruto running his hands along your body and mounting you day after day, the feel of running through the woods together, oh, it would be so romantic. Final flashback. Mixing said, "Well, I wasn't very confident that I could graduate anyway," around the incredibly pink cheeks. After noticing this effect and the fact that Ayame appeared to be the original cause, Ino and Hinata elevated Ayame to a significant supporting role. Once more, she had very little talent, but she was very good at using the little things to manipulate other people. All of this was disregarded by Naruto, who held his empty stomach. He whimpered, "Ayame Nichan," to attract the older teen's attention. "I'm hungry, Datbeo." Naruto's whining voice nearly cracked, and Ayame shot him a sidelong glance. She teased affectionately, "Sure, what do you want today, Mr. Shinobi?" Easily a dozen bowls were ordered in a flurry of activity. The offset booth and privacy curtain were actually commissioned and purchased by Ino for this reason. She and her fellow ninja were killing calories and body fat with the amount of chakra they were using every day since she started training with Naruto and Hinata. She had not had the opportunity to even attempt dieting even though she was only above Mixing, near the bottom of the totem. Not because Mixing wasn't trying, but rather because she wasn't as brilliant as Ino. She still had to meet the physical needs of food and water. She couldn't let anyone see her consuming 20 bowls of ramen at once. She had eaten 2 bowls for the first time when she was having a snack with her gossip guild. The way they had regarded her had made her feel ashamed. She had not only actually consumed her first bowl, but she had also collected the rest of Sakura's and Ginger's bowls as she positioned herself appropriately, immediately to Naruto's left and Hinata to his right. Ino sighed every bit the mousy servant girl that she was depicted as. Mixing had always found a spot to sit at the back of the blonde. Naruto was startled out of his reverie by Ino's slurred, "You know, we're going to need to add more members to our gang, boss," as she spoke in a male dialect. Naruto's cherub expression of bewilderment was endearing. "What the hell are you talking about? This isn't a gang at all, Ino, just a group of friends," he attempted to clarify. After realizing, Hinata slurred in the male dialect and shook her head, slapping her palm on the low table. She roared, "This just won't do. We need more blood in our gang." Although Naruto was unsure of when Hinata had changed, the yukata and small shorts she wore were undoubtedly distracting, and the way her right arm and shoulder were exposing her tightly bound chest as the sleeve drooped, unused, made him blush deeply. As a Yakuza slave would, Ayame returned with the first tray of food and smiled as she slipped into Naruto's increasing perplexity. She must have bowed countless times while serving the quartet, slipping into character as well. The morning after, with identical smiles on their faces, Naruto and Mixing entered the classroom at last. Both of them had succeeded. The 2 near washouts were finally identified after 3 years, 2 of which were failures, and a night of deceit that nearly led to their being called traitors. Thinking about how wonderful it felt to be that much closer to realizing his dream, Naruto joyfully adjusted his Hite. Who needs a clue? Starts with AH. He noticed almost 100 other hopefuls whispering and chatting as he looked around the room. Ino claims that this was a record-breaking graduation rate this time. There were a staggering 30 more students than the previous time, and the closest number before reaching so many genin graduates had been 3 years ago. Aside from Mixing, who was by his side, he recognized 3 faces among the throng of official ninja that were more important to him than anyone else. Hinata was sitting where she usually sits, and Ino was in the middle of a group of girls. Attempting to divert the class's attention from herself, Naruto made his way to the third face. With everyone watching Naruto as he made his way to his target, the room went silent. "Sasuke," he said in a tight, controlled voice. The Uchiha glanced up from his desk, across his piled hands, and into Naruto's eyes. "As of today, our feud is over. We're shinobi now, and the next time we meet will most likely be out on the battlefield," he said informally. Unaware that he was holding his breath, Sasuke let it out. His shoulders, which were always tense, relaxed, and he placed his hands palms down on his desk. He said, "You're right, we can't fight like kids anymore." With seriousness, Sasuke grinned slowly, very slowly, almost straining. It was gentle but sincere. "Just don't think I'll ever let you surpass me." With his eyes closed and all of his teeth exposed, Naruto flashed a fox-like smile. "Just you wait, I'll become a Junin in no time." With genuine belief, Sasuke nodded his head. Then, he challenged, "I'll be one in half the time, then." Naruto scowled for a moment before a smile came back to his face. Haha. Sasuke, the emotionless, actually told a joke. Iruka, who had just 2 days ago dislocated his left arm and was still in a sling, rushed into the room before anyone could speak. He said, "Okay, Class 1, hope you're ready, as we have an unprecedented number of elite Junin wanting squads this year," while his own eyes continued to show shock at the names on his list. "As we have so many students to graduate this year, teams will not so much be numbered as named. I'll begin by naming the elite squads first. If you were selected for an elite team, I expect you to reach Chunin by next year. Please make Konoha and the academy proud," Iruka said. The children all hurried to their seats, their ears burning and their eyes riveted at that moment. 36 seasoned ninja came into the room and stood casually behind Iruka. The most unexpected was Kakashi, who appeared irritated as he crossed his arms and glared at a particular group of Junin instructors, too. Iruka swallowed uneasily at the overwhelming force of the crowd. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, and then he started talking. He yelled, "Okay, Team Yamanaka," as Inoichi, a tall, blonde man, stepped forward and peered over the assembled ninja with sparkling eyes. He announced, "We have Hibiki Ryuga, Saotome Ranma, and Ching Moose, as 3 of the best ninja graduates. Those who trained directly under Sasuke and Naruto in Taijutsu came forward to welcome their new teacher." The 4 departed swiftly, and as the triplets rose, Iruka called out, "Team Akamichi Ryu, Ken and Chun-Li Jormungandr," pointing to the largest Junin after Sasuke. "Of course, The three were the best in the class for ninjutsu. They even outperformed Hinata and Sakura in terms of chakra molding ability. Iruka cleared his throat as they strolled out, Chun-Li complaining that she would have to care for her brothers for the remainder of her career. Team Shiranui, Manny Pacquiao, Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. There was some unhappy complaining because the three players listed were not the best shooters and were more mediocre in all three of the main skills. The three, however, were thrilled to be on an elite team and rushed to their instructor, almost tackling him, with tears of pride. Iruka gave a dismaying shake of his head. He said, "All right, let's calm down." While the children kept muttering, he yelled, "Team Ebisu, Pai Ayano Koji, Yakumo Fuji, and Benares Ryujin," as the three most intelligent students approached. He yelled, "Team Sarutobi," which caused some people to look up in search of the Hokage. Since that was the god of shinobi's last name, people thought it was a bust and forgot that he was still an elite Junin. When a young man who was significantly taller than the village leader stepped forward, Iruka started to say, "Shikamaru Nara, Shoji Akamichi," but Naruto's favorite blonde and the two named boys interrupted her. They all piped, "Ino Yamanaka, we already know," simultaneously after Hinata told Ino 2 days ago. It had been the only topic she could discuss. To their dismay, she had even begun bringing her clan brothers, Shikamaru and Shoji, along to her gossip sessions. Iruka turned to Asuma and rubbed at his nape. He said tremblingly, "I'm sorry, they're not usually so spirited." Asuma gave the young man who had been adopted into the family a warm smile, resembling an adopted brother. "It's all good." There's a Japanese phrase that I can hear Asuma say, but I can't think of a better translation. "I'm excited that I was the Sarutobi selected to continue our tradition." Iruka gave a nod and observed the group departing. A significant portion of the students had been removed from the original groupings, and the classroom appeared less crowded for the first time this year. Iruka started, "Team Hitaki," but the elite Junin touched his shoulder. Iruka stopped talking and let the man speak with a slightly weary tone. Kakashi stated, "My team will only have 2 members due to special circumstances beyond my control." He was a little resentful because the Hokage knew that he had been waiting for Naruto for 13 years. If the blonde didn't succeed on his 3rd try, he would even be placed under special apprenticeship, just like Guy had done for that Lee boy the previous year. The fact that Naruto would not be on his team at all nearly made him feel deceived, but he would do his best to carry out orders. Sakura Haruno, top in class in intellectual studies and 4th in chakra control, high marks in weapons accuracy and high potential for genjutsu and medical training, he said blandly. Sakura stood up, blushing from all of her achievements. He paused as he raised his Hite Ite to reveal his Sharingan. Sasuke Uchiha, top score in Taijutsu, 4th in ninjutsu, 2nd 3rd in chakra control, and, he said, the last Uchiha in the village, which caused a few of the children, including Naruto and Sasuke, to gasp. Sasuke stood up instantly and was about to ask a question, but he refrained from speaking out. Fortunately for him, Naruto mimicked the action exactly, but without hesitation. "Hey you've got the Sharingan." Kakashi followed the action with an eye smile as he slowly lowered his headband in a jovial reply. "Yes, that's right, Captain Obvious." Naruto let out a loud growl and opened his mouth to speak, but Hinata's soft touch instantly calmed him. "Whatever," he sighed, crossing his arms and sitting down. His sails now devoid of air. Mixing gave Hinata a grateful glance that caused the Hyuga girl to blush. Ino smirked, still standing in the corridor, watching curiously as Asuma, Shoji, and Shikamaru sighed in exasperation. She muttered, "I thought so." In a knowing whisper, the girl who was clearly in charge of this group persisted in making them wait for departure even though they wanted to move on. Iruka yelled, "That's it for the elite squads." As he started to read the other teams, he exclaimed, "Let's see, we'll start with Team Uchiha," as the most stunning ninja in the village appeared, her crimson eyes dancing over the children before pausing with a hint of pride on her ward, Hinata. Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Ibarame. The 3 children silently got up and departed. Though Kiba did complain about not being included in the elite squads, however, the pain subsided when he spied Naruto and remembered that he was also left out. Every student and Junin gradually withered away until only Iruka, Sume, a wild, animalistic woman dressed in a Junin uniform, Anko, a woman in a brown trenchcoat, purple skirt, and mesh top, Hana, a young girl who Naruto vaguely recognized, wore a Chunin vest, both of which opened to reveal her cleavage. Naruto and Mixing remained. Lastly, Naruto and Mixing, Iruka said to the 2 children who had completely appended Konoha's upper echelon, "Since neither of you have a clan to fall back on, much less any experience with Ninken combat, the Hokage has seen fit to assign you the foremost Junin in Ninken combat. Sume Inuzuka, her daughter, the second best. Hana Inuzuka and the possibly the best intuitive animal partner combat expert, Anko Mitarash. Anko abruptly threw out 2 kunai, obstructing Hana and Sum's view and spreading a huge black banner, interrupting Uruka. Sexy and single, Anko-chan. Was written on the banner. Anko teasingly pointed out, "You keep praising my good points like that and I may have to change the status on my banner." Uruka swallowed uneasily and flushed. He gave the award, and no, that's okay, since Academy, he and Anko had discussed the idea a number of times, but neither was really prepared to begin a formal relationship. Uruka shook his head, and Anko pointedly ignored the Genin's odd expressions and the complaints of the Inuzuka women as she took a scroll out of her coat. She exclaimed, "Okay, let's get this show on the road, mission time." With tears in his eyes, Naruto found himself standing beneath Anko, staring adoringly at the diminutive but accomplished special Tokubetsu Junin. "Anko sensei," he exclaimed. "Such style and charisma." Tragically, Sume shook her head. Anko grinned broadly and said, "Yeah, that's right, kid," with pride. Sadly, Sume Inuzuka showed up as a rain cloud. "Anko, stop trying to foist your damn mission on these kids and deal with cleaning your mess on your own," she said with a low voice. A huge blue-gray wolf, lacking its left ear and sporting an eye patch on its right eye, sat at her heels. In fact, he seemed amused as Naruto and Mixing surveyed the sight of the enormous and terrifying war beast. They also observed that Hana owned 3 identical dogs with only minor variations in coat patterns under Hana. These half-wolf, half-dog creatures kept a close eye on the room. Mixing was a little nervous as she walked toward the Wolf Fang clan using a formal bow. She declared, "Sensei, I look forward to learning from you." It only took a little prodding for Naruto to mimic the words and gestures. A quick stroll and later leaving Anko, Sume looked at her team of genin, and said, "Normally, first, a ninja must create a chakra pathway in his or her nin ken, and over a period of months, that ninja must exercise the chakra network to expand the pool, but you and Naruto are unique." During her explanation, Sume stopped to point to a big wolf by her side. The great beast approached her outstretched hand and touched it. She said, "I have to use special hand seals to manipulate my nin ken's chakra." Her wolf turned into an exact replica of her in a puff of smoke. Like kids at a magic show, Naruto and Mixing clapped and smiled as she brained the children with wild punches. The real Sume blushed. "I'm not here to entertain you, you brats." "Ouchie," Mixing said, rubbing the lump on her head before climbing back into a seat. Naruto did a little better, but he was muttering obscenities. Sume went on, "Like I was saying," and pointed to her duplicate. "Nin ken cannot use their own chakra for jutsu. Even if in human form they can mimic our hand seals and even pump up their chakra, but for some reason, they can't activate the jutsu without direct contact." The dawning of understanding tickled Meishing's mind, and she raised her hand. "Is that what makes us unique? We can both use our chakra independently?" As she freed her wolf partner from his altered state, Sume smiled like a savage animal. "Got it in one with training under me. The best man-beast practitioner in the village. You'll be kicking ass and taking names in no time." Mirror images of each other, Naruto and Mixing smiled like crazy people. "Yosha, let's do this." After Naruto's loud command, Sume glared and took a moment to wipe her ears. "Yeah, you're gonna be bugging Hana, Naruto," she said, glancing at Kuromaru, her partner. With a nod, the wolf took off with amazing speed. The statement caused the blonde ninja to blink. "Who's Hana, Sume-sensei?" Mixing glanced surreptitiously at Naruto, a little concerned that he might remember the wild beauty. From the year prior to their first graduation attempt, she has heard that Hana's wild nature and beauty have only grown. Mixing chose to remain silent despite considering the idea. Sume noticed Meishing's concern and affection for the blonde brat as she glanced over at her with a sparkle in her eye. "Oh," she thought to herself, "this is going to be fun." Each of the 3 Hymaru brothers, Hana's wolf dog partners, shuddered and retreated a step in their ready stance. "This feeling," the Chunin veterinarian thought, trembling visibly, "it's so strong and evil. Should we rush and flank him or play tit for tat?" Hana whispered, glancing at her nin ken, more because she was uneasy staring into Naruto's face with his glowing red eyes and green chakra smoke rolling along his figure than anything else. The middle animal smirked and spoke, which was amazing, but only another wolf or an Inuzuka could understand. The beast said, "Let's go for a rush. I'm interested if his skills are as good as his kill intent." As her partner, the Hymaru who had spoken, approached from the opposite side, Hana nodded her lovely head and hurried the boy. Her back arched and her posture low. They both moved at the speed of a thrown kunai and crossed paths frequently. A savage smile spread across Naruto's face as his gaze followed them both. He made a lighthearted remark, "This might leave a mark." As the two advanced to attack, neither Hana nor the wolf dog were aware of what transpired at one point. Her Ninken's jaws were wide and prepared to clamp the boy's spine, mid-back, while Hana's kunai was aimed at tearing out the jugular. A spray of blood appeared, and Hana found herself unable to move and staring up at the sky. Before a pain in her chest informed her that she had been hit, Shunin pondered where the blood had come from after a few hesitant moments of straddling that razor's edge between life and death anguish. Yes, it was a good pain. The numbness she had been feeling up until now was a far cry from this. She worried about her lifelong friend after hearing her wolf dog's faint whimpering cry, which reminded her that she wasn't the only one attacked. She caught a glimpse of Naruto's worried frown. "Hey, Hana-ni-chan, are you alright?" With considerable effort, she was able to push herself back up as strength gradually returned to her limbs weakly. She managed. What the hell was that?" Sheepishly, Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. He said, "It was a cross cut with a bladed edge fist." As though he were speaking to a young child, he helped the girl sit up and said, "I was sure you would have dodged. Even Ino's fast enough to get out of my reach when I'm moving that slow." Looking to her right, Hana saw her partner lying in the grass in submission, unharmed, while he gazed at her. "Hey Jin. 3, are you alright?" The wolf gave a gentle nod. The wolf began to whimper once more. "Naruto-sama didn't harm me, but your chest exploded," the wolf cried. Hana saw perfect, if slightly reddened, skin as she peered down at her ruined Shunin vest, and the torn open jacket underneath her nipples were only at the far sides of the opening, and the hole was positioned so that it opened her like a tin can and now showed off a good deal of the flesh between her breasts. Hana blushed a little and eeped as she covered her bare breasts with her hands. Though he blushed, Naruto continued to gaze at the older girl, visions of those big, bouncy eyes dancing in his head. The mere thought of them was stimulating his body and mind in novel and intriguing ways, even though he genuinely had no idea what he would do with them. "You can stop staring now," snarled Hana, exposing her seldom embellished fangs. Steam whistled from Naruto's ears, and he flushed from head to toe. Sorry." Hana shook her head slowly, saying, "This boy, to be so powerful and yet appear so innocent." She thought thoughtfully. To her, Naruto was a mystery. She had heard about the blonde boy who was terrible at all things ninja throughout the academy, but seeing him and getting destroyed by him in one blow, to be honest, it was unfair. She had put in a lot of effort to reach her current position, and in just a single year, he was exceeding Hana's own speed and calling it slow. That's enough training for today. Meet me at Mom's house tomorrow morning and we'll see what she wants to do," Hana said. Naruto shrugged and scowled. He moaned loudly, "I thought we'd get more than one spar in today, especially after I healed you," and then strode off, his eyes a little reflective. Hana turned back to her body and stared at it, the red color fading. "He healed me?" As he moved through the training grounds, Naruto ignored the woman's words. He saw a number of genin teams conversing and practicing with their Junin sensei, but Team 7, where his rival was the one that attracted his attention. He caught Sasuke going all out against a man whose gray hair defied gravity. Naruto scowled as the man took the Uchiha to task while reading a book. He was aware of Sasuke's skill, even though Naruto could acknowledge that the last Uchiha was superior to him. It was incredibly humiliating to watch his opponent be thrown around by a man who wasn't even paying attention. Naruto whispered, "Such a difference." While glancing down at his hands, he said, "I need to get stronger if I'm going to become Hokage," and then a big smile began to appear on his face. "Yeah, I'll become the strongest. The fastest. Just wait, I'll show you the true power of Naruto Uzumaki," he exclaimed loudly while bouncing his head back in laughter and placing his hands on his hips. Kakashi glanced up at the strangely laughing blonde from his book. From his neck-deep burial in the earth, Sasuke glared at Naruto. "Is he making fun of me?" Naruto turned and sped off, strategizing how he would not only get closer to Sasuke but also overcome his present limitations and succeed him as the next Hokage. Many hours later, Sume glanced at the ruined uniform that Hana was displaying. Sume teased, "So Naruto's as frisky as an Inuzuka," taking pleasure in her daughter's red face and her son Kiba's pale face as he entered the house. Hana shook her head and whimpered, sounding and looking like a girl of the same age who was a civilian. "I'm serious. That kid's in a league of his own. I've never been outpaced and taken down by just one blow before," she said with conviction. Kiba gave a headshake. "Who are you talking about now? I swear you go through too many boy toys, Hana," he mockingly said. Avoiding his older sister's blow, however, he was taken aback when one of her dogs decided his butt tasted like chicken. He gave a fierce command, "Ouch! Let go," and watched with a smirk as the big wolf dog retreated. As she observed the interaction, Sume could hardly contain her laughter. Hana, who was on the verge of hitting her younger brother, said, "Kiba, You were in his class this year. How good exactly is Naruto? Kiba gave a shoulder shrug. Outside of Sasuke, he's the best at Taijutsu. He sucks with Genjutsu and can barely hit a target with a kunai or shuriken, but his aim's gotten better through the year. I think only Sasuke knows how good he is. I mean, only a few Junin that had to be hired on to break up their fights could see, much less stop those two going at each other. Kiba shook his head in disbelief. Besides, he needed to work on his own issues. Sume appeared interested, and Hana scowled. As fast as the Uchiha? How did he manage that in just 1 year? Hana gestured toward her jacket and vest, which were torn apart. I'm guessing the same way he glows like a demon and ripped me to shreds in a single strike. When Sume heard her daughter say something, her eyes flashed dangerously. She yelled angrily, I'll be back later tonight. I need to see someone, in a very tight voice. As their mother left the house, even leaving her Ninken behind, Kiba and Hana exchanged a bewildered look. Hana pondered out loud, I wonder what that was about. Kiba said bluntly, maybe she's out getting laid, but his smirk at Hana's blush suggested he was expecting the response. With Naruto entering the hidden clearing that he and his close companions had become accustomed to using, Naruto grinned broadly. Everyone was gathered there, practicing their kata, even though it was getting late in the afternoon and almost nightfall. Naruto walked to a tree stump and sat in lotus position, asking, Hey, what are you all doing here? In a very wanton gesture, Ino looked up and bounded over, hanging over Naruto's shoulder. Well, after I trained with my team, I realized that I was way ahead of them, the blonde girl purred while playing with Naruto's whisker marks. Although Hinata snarled and gave Ino a flat glare, the blonde merely prodded her tongue back. I came here to get some real training, she said softly, her voice tight, forcing Ino to sigh and step back. My team specializes in tracking, just like I thought, so we don't focus on the combat aspect, only on our family traits. Mixing flashed her tattered dress and smiled widely. Sume's sensei kicked my ass and then gave me seconds. It was great, the girl exclaimed. Hinata, Naruto, and Ino gave the girl sour looks. They were all whispering something about being lucky. Naruto took his book from his pouch and began reading from it after making a swift swipe. With Academy out of the way, we have a whole day to commit again. Grant admissions will take some time out of our schedule, but I plan to finish this book as soon as possible. With more than a hint of pride in their eyes, the girls turned to face Naruto. Ino nodded at Hinata. After they exchanged glances, she took the sign and raised her voice. And Naruto-kunai, that is. She stammered, her pink matoki spilling into the clearing in her nervousness as her face glowed like a bonfire. While the other two girls provided emotional support to the anxious Hyuga girl, Naruto watched in confusion but waited calmly. What I mean is, I want, when I'm the head of my clan, I want to swear allegiance to your Uzumaki clan, she eventually accomplished. Astonished, Naruto jumped out of his chair and yelled. He rubbed his aching butt. Ouch, what are you talking about, Hinata-chan? We're all a loyal ninja to Konoha, he protested. Hinata protested with a fierce shake of her head. She said, it's more than that, Naruto-kun, and Mixing and Ino nodded. There's something special, different, about you. Whether you become Hokage or not, if you're ever in need, we'll give our lives for you, the shy child firmly responded. After giving a nod, Ino took out 2 scrolls. I wasn't sure about saying anything yet, but when Hinata said she wanted to do the same, I had these contracts drawn up. Naruto's expression was bewildered as he studied the scrolls. The blonde acknowledged, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but she didn't back down. With eyes far older than his years, he swore, I don't know anything about having a clan, but if you really think you should put your trust in me, I won't let you down. I'll never betray my friends. All 3 kunoichi gave a nod. It had always been clear that Naruto would develop into something unique, and it went far beyond his fighting style. It was his spirit. The youngster appeared to run excitedly toward a destiny that rested on his shoulders. Hinata took one of the scrolls after Ino opened them. Ino took the same kunai and mirrored the Hyuga with her own contact. After Hinata pulled one out, pricked her finger, and signed her name in blood in an act of loyalty, both girls approached Naruto and knelt down, presenting the scrolls to him. Before slapping his entire hand on each contract in time, Naruto took the kunai and plunged it through his palm to the hilt. I, Naruto Uzumaki, gladly offer my own life for yours. If you ever need me, I'll be there, Datbeo. 3 ninjas were concealed in the trees, keeping a stealthy eye on things that the children couldn't even pick up on. Hiruzen Sarutobi was the first, his lips moving in a slight smile. He whispered, Naruto, to think you would come so far and earn such respect. Only his friends could hear. The second was Asuma, who smiled just like his father. So, she really is serious about this, he observed while he resisted the temptation to light a cigarette. Sume Inuzuka was the last to approach the Hokage regarding Naruto's seal weakening. She never thought she would enter the abandoned woods where the Senju and Namikaze families used to train, much less witness the descendants of two of the strongest clans promising allegiance to a boy as despised as Naruto. She wondered why the Hokage hadn't arrested the children for plotting and mutiny as she looked up at him. Hiruzen gave Sume a gentle smile. I know what you're thinking, Sume, and it's not quite what you think. I know your clan is fairly young, so you're still learning and building your knowledge. But every aged clan here holds a loyalty to a larger clan that ties loyalty to either the Senju or Uchiha clan. Even though both are down to their last heirs, he continued. Before ninja villages like Konoha existed, there were only clans, which is why we call it the Clan Wars prior to the Shinobi World Wars. These clans were often losing members in combat and often had to turn to a stronger clan to rebuild their numbers. Even the great clans were not immune. In fact, the history of the Yamanaka, Nara, Akamichi and Sarutobi clans goes back 200 years before the founding of this very village. Those three clans were in dire straits and were down to a handful of women each. My clan took them in and never asked for anything from them. They swore themselves to us, and in 3 generations we're 1,000 strong apiece. Our loyalty to one another has never been questioned, even now. Despite her thoughtful expression, Sume nodded her head. I wonder if Kiba or Hana would swear fealty to Naruto. Asuma finally succumbed to his nicotine addiction after taking a long drag and shrugging. Who can say I wouldn't mind doing the same? I'm sure you've noticed how different Naruto is while driven and focused on his goal of becoming Hokage. He takes the time to bring others up alongside him. Sume nodded, the smell of the cigarette making her nose wrinkle. Asuma, you're a handsome young man, but that horrendous odor will be the death of you. Whatever woman takes you to her bed is gonna kill you for making her house smell like that, she said with softened eyes. Asuma gave a small laugh. He remarked jokingly, maybe I do it to keep the women away, like Kakashi and his face mask. When the teasing Junin heard a page turn, he looked up to see Kakashi reading his favorite orange book while seated upside down in a tree branch in greeting. He held up his right hand. Yo. Hiruzen chuckled softly when the Hokage said, watching over your little brother again. Kakashi gave a head nod. I still don't see why you don't just go down and talk to him, Asuma complained. Sume was a little confused by this. Wait, Naruto's a Hitaki? Everyone present shook their heads and gave the woman a look. Nah. More like I was taken in by his father and swore to always look after him, which I've always done while home, Kakashi said. Both Hiruzen and Asuma nodded when Asuma said, I still think he could use a sibling to talk to, Kakashi. Sume crossed her arms beneath her large chest and gave a low, wolf-like growl. I have no idea who his parents are. I once thought it was Kushina, as she was the most notorious Uzumaki in the village and he acts just like her despite never meeting the woman, Sume said. But, her hair was so red that there's no way her genes wouldn't be more dominant than I considered, Lady Tsunade, but she may be too old, even for an illegitimate brat. Sume narrowed her eyes as the group shuffled uneasily. One of Mido-sama's descendants? They took strange hair colors, like that Haruno on Kakashi's team, she said. The men gave a headshake. Sorry, but we can't reveal the truth of his lineage, at least not until this generation reaches Junin. We still don't have the ninja strength to fend off the number of aggressors towards his parents. Hiruzen responded prior to the woman asking. The Junin watched as the teens parted ways as the sun kissed the ground, Mixing and Naruto taking out another book while Ino and Hinata ran off into the woods. Asuma let out a sigh. He said, well, I've got to go make sure the girls get home safely, and then he hurried off. Sume cast a curious glance at Kakashi, wondering if he would follow suit. The man dismissively waved his hand as he turned another page. He noted, I usually stick around here a couple days on end until Naruto wears himself out, he said jokingly, but make sure you watch closely as they use their Ninken style. It might surprise you, with a smile. Sume turned away from Kakashi's twisted chuckle and turned back to face the field. Mixing transformed into a stunning white mare at 18 hands, flawless. In a loud explosion her Motoki started to seep into the air as she whinnied and stamped the ground, her white mane and tail dancing with a nod. Naruto began putting on her helmet, her armored appearance as brilliant as it had been the morning before. Sume saw Naruto's bright jumpsuit solidify as he flashed through hand seals that led to a conclusion she was unfamiliar with. Sume's eyes narrowed. Is that the iron hair technique? Hiruzen gave a gentle nod. He wanted to buy some armor, but I told him it would be too heavy and bulky, not to mention loud when on the battlefield. So he made up his own armor-forming transformation. He's really a genius when it comes to making jutsu. Sume gave a stupid nod. A kill intent caught Sume's attention as it burst into the air out in the clearing at levels close to High Chunin. Naruto started to smoke and release pure chakra into the air, giving off a strong aura as Naruto's Motoki engulfed Meishing's. her tail fluttered and burst into an even more powerful presence. Sume stopped. As a result, she hesitated because it was getting close to a high-level Junin's kill intent, but it wasn't close enough to stun the seasoned Junin fighter. She said, "That's amazing." No wonder Hana didn't know what hit her, and they're already so close to perfect synchronization, as she watched Motoki integrate and dance with Meishing's lighter green and Naruto's green. Naruto shouted, "Yosh!" So the first technique is a size manipulation, while nodding his head and pulling at a pair of leather reins. As she spoke, Meishing threw her head up and down like any other horse. "Alright. Try taking over my Motoki and doing it. Sume-sensei showed me how she synchronizes with her partner, and I'm eager to see if we can do it too," Meishing said with a smile. Sume's eyebrow went up. "This can turn out badly. She's nowhere near ready to give up chakra control," Sume said. Sume was validated a moment later when chakra repulsion threw Naruto off the horse's back with a sheepish smile. Naruto slowly stood up, his right arm hunched at an awkward angle. Sume ran into the clearing and began mothering Naruto before Hiruzen could stop her. As she examined Naruto's wound, she fussed, "Damn it, you broke your arm, brat." With a smile, Hiruzen vanished into a leaf whirl. With a sigh, Kakashi closed his book. Realizing that Sume was about to end the two children's training for the evening, he said, "Oh well, good night, Naruto-kun," and then he departed in his own shunshin. The apartment of Naruto complained, "Come on, Sume-sensei," as the Junin escorted him into his chamber. "It was just a little break and I've already healed it. Me and Meishing could have kept practicing all night," he said. Sume maintained a severe expression. "First of all, no healing jutsu can be used like that without some kind of limit of backlash, so stop using now and recover naturally unless it's an emergency," the mother wolf said. Meishing and Naruto winced as they, along with Ino and Hinata, repeatedly utilized the Chapter 5 instant recovery. As soon as Naruto found it, they began using it. "Second, who the hell told you idiots to try synchronizing chakra networks when only one of you even had a lesson? Not that you even mastered the first level of it, Meishing," she said with her fangs showing. With a yawn, Tora lay back down after lifting her head to gaze at the irate Kunoichi. Meishing let her shoulders drop and let out a defeated sigh. She explained, "I believed that if I had Naruto-sama by my side, I could accomplish it." However, Naruto crossed his arms and scowled with a detached look on his face. He declared dismissively, "We don't need your help, you old crone. We've managed to get this far on our own after all of this time." "KKKWHO, the hell is old?" Meishing looked at the smoldering crater where Naruto was now buried and shook her head sorrowfully. Her words, "He asked for that." Tora meowed and nodded her head in agreement. "Mao," she said. Sume dusts her hands and huffs. "From now on you only practice team training when I'm with you. It's the reason I'm your Junin sensei." Meishing nodded, and Sume blasted his way out of the apartment, complaining all the way, "Damn idiot, call me old, I could land a man as young as Hana," she thought to herself as she shut the front door for good. Meishing offered, "En Naruto-sama," as she pulled the blonde from the ground. "Perhaps you should avoid upsetting a Junin," she suggested. Naruto's eyes swirled, his face a macabre mass of lumps, and he nodded in a daze. Still lying on his back with his forearm across his forehead, Sasuke awoke with a scowl once more. It was that dream and accusation that he would never witness materialize, events that had never occurred. One could never argue that Uchiha people lacked pride. Furthermore, Sasuke bore the greatest burden of pride because he was the last member of his clan. He needed a unique style that would elevate him to Kakashi's level and keep him well above that twice-damned Naruto. Sasuke's damned pride told him that Naruto wanted to prove he was superior to him, even though he knew intellectually that the boy was his best ally and the ideal rival to keep pushing him. Sasuke climbed out of bed, frowning as he stood up. He complained to himself, "There must be some fighting style that I can use." Before leaving his family's house, he hastily put on a black tank top and white baggy pants, which are typically worn on chilly evenings before arriving at the council hall. He strolled through the deserted streets of the Uchiha district. He would never have gone through here a year ago, but now things were different. The hinges groaned in protest as he pushed the heavy steel door open, and Sasuke vowed to use oil to fix it later. His gaze shifted to his almost mastered Sharingan, which could easily pierce the darkness as he began a lengthy journey through the deserted, pitch-black halls of the place. Sasuke approached a grooved outline at the end of a branching hallway, positioned his palm dead center, and sent a burst of chakra through it. With a gentle hiss, the groove expanded, and the Uchiha pushed open the sliding door that was now visible. As soon as he entered, a light turned on, revealing a secret library. The Uchiha had concealed their treasure here. Like a dragon's lair, all forms of jutsu and fighting techniques from around the globe were gathered by their eyes and compiled into scrolls. When Sasuke first discovered this location, These scrolls were initially arranged in a way that made no sense to him. However, everything made sense when he needed specific things today for a fighting style. He needed something quick and powerful, and there were hundreds of styles that fit that description incredibly. He saw the name of one that he honestly hadn't anticipated. As he reached for the scroll, he wondered, the hummingbird fist? Wasn't that the Yondaime's style? Saddle smiled as he reviewed the exercises and training to maintain the physical strain. Sasuke was certain that he would discover something later. Even though it didn't explain how he accomplished his instantaneous transitions, he had his speed style for now. He moaned, now, for some power. Although many claimed to have power, most of them were for suicidal final attacks or muscle heads, not just the Akamichi final technique. Sasuke observed how much body fat and chakra was transformed and asked, is that why they eat so much? The idea that Choji could kill a ninja on his own terms was both terrifying and humble. However, he was unwilling to gain weight in order to defeat Kakashi. When he reached the final scroll of strong styles, he sighed and scowled. Although Kaden could replicate almost every attack, it was a sweetened style it would have to do. Events were happening all over the village that would alter the structure and shake the sleeping bear cages, while Sasuke was busy trying to find a new way to recover. As his daughter was swept through a strange kata that prioritized strength over Jukin's tender touches, Hiyashi scowled at her. He had let the girl learn this odd fist for a whole year, thinking she would give up and fail, yet here she was, practicing and matching blow for blow with her sister, a natural Jukin master. The two were not sparring, rather, they were each performing a kata at opposite ends to show the council and himself how Hokuto Ryukin covered the gaps in the family style and even complimented it. Hinata was totally at ease, her eyes even closed, let alone using her Kekkei Genkai, while Hanabi had her Baikugan engaged and burning diligently. It would be an understatement to say that the council was impressed. They adored the style and the ease with which it passed through Jukin's defenses and guards. Even though the girls were moving slowly, the fact that a practitioner could move at the same speed as a Hyuga indicated that the clan was having problems. Fortunately, only a small number of children were using it, and if Hiyashi had half a reason, he would set up bad luck before any of the genin became too powerful. A counselor said, "That's great, Hinata-sama," as the girls bowed to each other. "This new Hokuto Ryukin is perfect. Where did you learn it?" "Our darling Hinata-sama may have been a late bloomer, irony, but she's shown so much improvement this year. Why, I'd wager that she made it up herself," said one. Hinata swallowed and blushed slightly. She was beginning to lose her nerves. "This style, it's master, I made a deal to learn this," she murmured. Even though it didn't happen as frequently as it had a year ago, it still happened occasionally, like right now. With everyone watching her expectantly, she was aware of their response, but this was a necessary step to close the distance if she was to keep her promise to Naruto. Hiyashi's menacing throat clearing attracted everyone's attention and gave Hinata a moment's relief. "In your own time, daughter," he gave his consent. Hinata gave her father a gentle smile. Naruto had been the one to show her what she needed to see. Even though her relationship with the man had never been the usual one between a father and daughter, despite being constrained by propriety, her father loved her and would give her little tokens of support. He could draw attention to himself, as he had done now, but he was not permitted to speak for her, much less openly express his affection. Hinata inhaled deeply and let it out gradually. "This is a fighting style owned by the newly established Uzumaki clan," she declared with firmness. The council blew up. There were shouts and cries of shock, footsteps and hands stomping on the dojo's wooden floors, and somehow someone grabbed a pair of shinobi sandals and hurled them at Hinata. Both were easily avoided by the heiress. Hinata firmly said, "If that is all, I will continue." In a tight, serious voice she sounded and looked almost exactly like Hiyashi, which caused the crowd to become silently submissive. "In payment for increasing our clan's taijutsu to include an entire second school, I have pledged to gift our allegiance to the Uzumaki clan." Oh no! If the last response was frenzied, this one gave the impression that it was a quiet acceptance. As the crowd became riotous and even started attacking one another out of rage and dissatisfaction, Hiyashi sighed. He would remain silent. Hinata was the clan's future and heir. She had to take it right away if she wanted to gain respect in the future. He was unable to speak up either way. Surprisingly, Hanabi, the secondary heiress, appeared thoughtful as she considered everything she had learned and seen about this new fighting style. It also helped that she knew her sister was hardly paying attention to her extensive reading list. Few things were secret between sisters, after all. The council finally became quiet as Hinata sat across from them, drinking a hot cup of green tea with Hanabi by her side. Asuma, the council's chosen speaker and an elderly man who had been a ninja for as long as Hiruzen Sarutobi, yelled, "How can you swear our allegiance?" He thundered, "We already have given our allegiance upon the establishing of this village," and slammed his fist's bottom into the ground. Hinata's father gave her a proud look as she lifted her right hand. She forced herself not to smile at that success. Our allegiance was to the Senju clan outside of Tsunade-sama, who is also a registered Uzumaki. By the way, there are no Senju left, and our village's princess is far past the age of conception, or have you forgotten this? Setsuna was another young man, only in his mid-20s, but already a successful elite Junin. The steam died as he remembered the third's law. But, even if that's the case, there's only one legitimate Uzumaki, and I can't see any women willing to sleep with a boy, he concluded absently. He has no heirs either. What if he dies on a mission? Shinigami forbid, he said. Then Hinata let her eyes drop. She wasn't a fool, she was aware of Naruto's presence, she could see it with her own eyes. And she could hear bits and pieces about it from the older generations, since Naruto frequently gave the more stout-hearted villagers perplexed looks. She doubted he even knew what it was. Hanabi broke the silence by saying, I support my sister's decision, which caused the hall to erupt in gasps. With a sly smile, Hanabi added, I also would offer my services in engaging myself to the Uzumaki clan's head, that is, should another, better option, not arise. To her sisters read the manipulative Hyuga evaluated, that should give her the kick in the pants, picturing the look on her rival Ino's face when she finds out. Asuma yelled, this is outrageous, as he tore open his kimono and pounded his chest, his eyes turning red. With her face still burning from what her younger sister had done, Hinata closed her eyes and got to her feet, calling the formal meeting to a close. Hinata's face remained as red as it had been inside the room as she leaned back against a wall as she entered the hallway with a silent, thank you. She put a hand over her chest and thanked Hanabi for the support and even for helping her approach Naruto about starting a relationship. Ultimately, a full year had passed since her admission. He should be familiar with dating relationships by now. Before the younger heiress shut the door, Hanabi slid it open to Hinata's side, letting the booming screams of stiff old men fill the corridors for a brief moment. Hinata, you did great in there, she said kindly, that is, as hospitably as any Hyuga, except Hinata herself, could be. When he mentioned Hinata, the adolescent got to his feet and seized Hanabi in a tight embrace with her nerves starting to wane. Hinata bit her bottom lip and questioned, oh Hanabi-chan, do you think Naruto will accept a marriage proposal? She detested such circumstances for a variety of reasons, including this: she might give an order and then have second thoughts a few minutes later. Hanabi grinned a smile that is sincere and truthful to Hokage. After observing her older sister's obvious relaxation, she added, that's nothing, I know he will. Chaos would begin to break out in Konoha. Please, inform Ino of this declaration, and tell her I said. Ichiraku, the next morning. Top that, who the hell does that meddling little girl think she's trifling with? Ino swore as she strode across the restaurant, leaving a deep furrow on her feet as she thought about Hanabi's challenge. Oh, Ino knew the younger Hyuga very well as a sexy teenage girl who could seduce any man or woman into putty. Ino had spent the last 4 years of her academy career establishing her reputation among the villagers. Hanabi, who was just starting her first year of academy, hadn't even had to try. The people that Ino had tricked into giving her power were going out of their way to give that Hyuga brat a foot kiss. Ino was not going to let this continue for the entire year. Ino had been feeding Hinata and Naruto. A slow and continuous project that little Trollop was just a month away from convincing Naruto to tell Hinata. Ino moaned as she started to rub her forehead. An engagement? And a formal one at that, she said. Ino complained and whimpered in exasperation. She would have sided with the bloody council if I had been the one to suggest it. One may wonder where Naruto was at this moment. The answer was straightforward. He and Hinata were seated next to each other, and they were both as red as lobsters, with steam beginning to swirl over their heads. An open scroll bearing the formal and official request that Naruto take the hand of either Hinata or Hanabi Hyuga as a pledge to treat the Hyuga clan equitably under his leadership was resting on the private table. Indeed, Naruto had figured out some relationship details, not all of it, of course, but enough to realize that he would soon have to spend a lot more time with Hinata. As he contemplated this completely agreeable notion, he heard Ino's voice once more. She was whining when she stopped to blush. They'll start with, she said, kiss kiss. Kaya. Mixing exclaimed, clutching her burning cheeks. This very real possibility had not occurred to her. Now, where would she reside? She had been living with Naruto for the entire previous year, using the additional stipend money to purchase clothing, ramen, and equipment for the two of them. She would now be sent to the streets for no other reason than to kiss someone. It was so scandalous and bold. As she threw her arms in the air and cursed Hanabi's name, Ayame peered into the private room to see what all the commotion was about. She saw 3 of the 4 people pacing around, and 3 of them red in the face. She humbly offered, maybe I should come back later, as the steaming ramen bowls in her hands sounded like a siren's cry to the kids inside. The first 2 to snatch a bowl and start gorging on the ramen were Naruto and Hinata, though it's possible that they did so to cover up their atomic blushes as she distributed the bowls of divine nectar. Ayame flashed a charming smile. She casually teased. You know, those two really are cute together, it's like fate. Mixing whispered to Ayame while nodding her head. I hope you have a boyfriend or something, cause Ino's about to start playing matchmaker, she warned conspiratorially. When the blonde happened to allow her attention to drift towards the pair of older teens, Mixing panicked. Eep. She shrieked, trying to raise her hands defensively. Sadly, the girl had completely forgotten that she was holding a bowl of ramen and managed to dump the entire bowl on her own head. No, she groaned pathetically, my ramen. Mixing was the center of attention, watching the discarded ramen with genuine pain on her face. Mme-chan, how were you able to? Naruto whimpered softly as he plucked a clump of noodles from her shoulder before putting it to his nose. After an experimental sniff, he slurped the noodles up. Yummy. As if he had just gained a second head, 4 young women gazed at Naruto. What? Feeling as though he had already gotten whatever it was, he reached across to Mixing a second time and plucked more noodles from the girl, this time while it was on her shoulder, a small portion of which had gotten into her top and down her cleavage. Something on my face? He asked, beginning to wipe his cheeks like a cat. Mixing let out a low mewling sound before turning as red as Hinata had previously been. Naruto-sama. She exclaimed in shock, but to be fair, the other young women were equally as stunned and still couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Naruto-sama is using me. Kaya. Don't do perverted things, Naruto. Only a moment after the scream reverberated throughout the tiny space, shuffling broke out, and Ayame, her cheeks as red as her headband, hurried away from the tent flaps, whispering, oh my, as she made her way to her father's kitchen, hands pressed to her cheeks. Wearing a nice dinner suit and flushed, Naruto glanced sideways at Ino, who was standing next to him in a slinky black dress with her arm wrapped around his. He swallowed uneasily and tugged at his bow tie, causing steam to escape into the air. Naruto-kun, stop fidgeting, Ino said gently, her beautiful face extending into a wry smile. Pausing to lick her thumb before dabbing at a smudge concealed in Naruto's dark whisker. In protest, Naruto whimpered, I don't even know what I'm here Ibeo, and let out a scowl. Ino dragged her fellow blonde along as a young man, who was not at all alarmed by Naruto's presence, greeted the two of them and walked into the fancy restaurant, ignoring his question with a practiced ease. The greeter announced, Miss Yamanaka, Mr. Uzumaki, pointing to a pleasant corner booth with a view of the rest of the establishment. I trust that this booth will meet your requirements, he said quietly. As she gave the young man a tip, Ino nodded and grinned wildly, thanks, Toshiro. In a few minutes my newest project will be walking through that door on a secret date, Ino said, turning to face Naruto as the young man returned to his podium to greet the next entrance. Her eyes had the same predatory gleam as before. Confusion at not knowing anything about Ino's project and dismay at the fact that his first real date was actually just a mission, one for which he wasn't even receiving payment, were the two main emotions that caused Naruto to raise one eyebrow. It was heartwarming to know that Naruto was genuinely interested in going on a date with her, but this was crucial. Her reputation as a matchmaker was at stake. Tell you what, Ino said softly, her right hand reaching out across the table and encircling her dates. What if we pretended to be on a typical date and periodically checked in on my couple? With his eyes closed and a look of frustration on his face, Naruto leaned back and said, I don't know, Ino-chan. But neither of them noticed that Ino was still holding his hand. Ino, one of only 2 people who knew the man's identity, smiled giddily as he heard Toshiro clearing his throat as he greeted a man in a nice 2-piece suit, an earthy shade of brown with a creamy white shirt, wearing a mask to protect his identity and a pair of black leather gloves over his hands. She was wearing a black cocktail dress that ended just above her knees, with a split up the left side to mid-thigh and a crimson flame pattern that ran along her pantyhose and merged to run halfway up her dress, the tips licking at her breasts. Like the man before her, she was wearing a mask, hers black with golden eyes and lovely eyelashes that seemed to flutter at random moments, as well as a pair of black gloves that ran up her arms, past the elbow, and ended halfway up the upper arm. Her figure was stunning, and her lightly bronzed skin was proof that she was not afraid of the sun. Toshiro hurried to her and seated her right across from the man after guiding her to the table. Naruto scrunched up his face, unable to identify either of them, but they both felt so familiar as Ino excitedly clapped her hands. Oh, Naruto-kun, this is going to be fantastic. As he balled his right hand into a fist, wondering why it had felt so warm just moments before, Naruto's scowl only grew more intense. Alongside the couple, well, this certainly the most unique omiai I've ever attended, he joked, and somehow, despite the man's blank white mask, the woman could picture him smiling broadly. The man's voice was deep and husky, a little grainy, but captivating, as if he could talk for hours and hold anyone's attention. "Oh, a little uneasy." The woman shuffled in her seat and fiddled with her hands on the table as she asked, "Do you attend these often?" with a note of curiosity in her mocking voice. The woman's return appeared to calm the man, who either ignored her discomfort or hardly noticed her body movements. "Well, to be honest, only one before," he said, "and it was a long time ago," he said amiably, giving the woman some space to unwind. The woman softly replied, "I apologize, that was a little impolite of me to ask, it's just nerves?" As he put his own unsteady hands on the table, the man's voice sounded tense. "It's absurd that even though I've been under the most pressure in my life, I can't stop my hands from shaking right now," he said softly. "Well, we definitely have the nerves in common," the woman said, her laughter soft and melodic in the air of the fancy restaurant. "According to Ino, we must wait until the end of the date to discuss work, ages, or names." With her hands finally settling, she asked calmly, "What's left to discuss?" "I love reading, taking strolls through town and gazing into the night sky," the man said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "Your voice is so intoxicating," she said huskily, her head tilted slightly, and she ignored the way he cleared his throat. "My hobbies are cooking and plotting pranks with a friend of mine," she offered warmly, leaning forward on her elbows with her hands holding her chin up. The way she was leaning was giving him a direct line of sight down her dress, and where soft flesh gave way to shadow, the man found himself inexorably drawn. He licked his parched lips and cleared his throat loudly, pointing out softly, "The way you're leaning," highlighting his current source of discomfort. The man tugged at his collar as he adjusted himself. The man would swear that the woman's mask blushed when she looked down. "Oh, I'm sorry, thank you," she choked out, because it wasn't often that you met a man that would prevent you from displaying yourself, and for that reason that she offered her thanks to him. She took a moment to sit up straight and adjust the cleavage of her dress. For a moment, the woman was afraid that she would burn her mask off as hot as her blush. With the most popular blonde couple with her feet tapping the floor with excitement, Ino let out a squeal of delight. "Eeeeee. This is going to be fantastic," she urged Naruto, who appeared even more perplexed than before. Just look at the way they're talking. This place is supposed to be a restaurant, but they don't even serve ramen," he complained, fiddling with his plate of salad. As she turned back to Naruto, Ino looked visibly deflated. "They have curry here. Perhaps you'll enjoy it in its place?" As he brought his firm fork to his mouth and bit into crisp lettuce, Naruto narrowed his eyes at her and said, "Curry is not a replacement for ramen." "At least the salads are fresh," Ino said helpfully, grinning sheepishly before nibbling on her own salad. Seeing Naruto nod while he finished his appetizer, Ino returned to her small project just in time, as the waiter had just returned with a tray of appetizers for the couple. "Table of omiai. When you're ready, I'll take your orders," the young waiter said, setting two bowls on the table, one containing a thick soup and the other two containing some foreign appetizers that neither of the guests had ever seen. "I do apologize for the long wait," he said. "I suppose I'll take the dancing octopus and some eel sashimi," the masked man said, passing his menu to him with a friendly nod. "I'll have the shrimp okonomiyaki with extra tempura flakes," the young woman said, hemming and hawing for a moment before settling on something before nodding her head. Before leaving, the waiter accepted the menus with a kind smile. "Okonomiyaki?" With a whimsical lilt in his voice, the masked man offered, "That's singing something I haven't had since I was a little child." "Tell me about it," the woman exclaimed joyfully, nodding her head. "My mother used to make it, and she was the best." "It's a shame that none of the stands in town offer it anymore," the man said, nodding his head as he removed a portion of his mask to reveal his mouth. However, for some reason, the mask activated a minor genjutsu that covered the portion of his face that was visible. "I've never tried this before," she admitted when she looked up, and the man across from her had paused whatever he was doing to watch her with interest. The woman followed his example, removing the mouth part from her own mask, and then slowly and carefully using her chopsticks to pick something green from her bowl and sniff at it. He took a deep breath as the woman slid the green whatever it was into her mouth, and his eyes widened as he wondered what the woman might react to. He naturally nodded his own head when he heard her admit it. She groaned, appearing to melt as her shoulders drooped. "This what it is, I do not know, but, wow," she exhaled in ecstasy. There was a hint of something he didn't know in the green thing, but it didn't seem to matter as he reached for a second morsel with his sticks. "Wow," he agreed, finding himself at a distinct lack of words. Many people who knew the man would have been shocked if they had known he was short on things to say. The man laughed amiably and mimicked her actions with his own chopsticks. For a few moments, everyone relished eating their food in friendly silence, but before long, the waiter had come back, taking orders for each customer with a kind grin before disappearing once more. A muscle memory made his right hand twitch, attempting to get him to reach into his jacket pocket for something to smoke, but he resisted the urge mercilessly. "So, do you find life in the village pleasing?" he asked, carefully crafting the question to avoid mentioning either person's line of work. "Since the day I was old enough to walk I've lived this village and wandering about to explore things," she said, returning with a nostalgic and daring note to her voice as she nodded enthusiastically, her hands clasped together as she gazed off into the distance, memories reliving themselves. "I understand exactly what you mean," the man said with a smile and a cautious nod of his head. "When I was a little boy, I used to do the same thing. However, I spend a lot of time at my current job. Maybe we can just go for a walk on the next date." The woman nodded and appeared to be smiling through her mask. "I think that would be wonderful," she said, her voice a little excited, but on the inside, she was dancing a joyful little jig as she began to eat. "I can't believe I asked that," he thought in utter panic, still trembling a little, almost afraid that the woman would change her mind and turn him down. The man nodded firmly, eating as well, his heart still pounding a mile a minute. He worked quietly at his food, not really eating, but watching the way she enjoyed her own meal, like he did with his own son once when he found something to his liking. The man smiled fondly. Table of spectators. Before taking his first bite, Naruto sighed and prodded the curry bowl with his spoon. "One still don't know how you talked me into getting this stuff," he complained. With an impish smile, Ino turned her attention from the couple to Naruto's captivating blue eyes, which seemed to be swallowed by the ocean as he looked back at her. As a slight flush began to appear on her face, Ino cleared her throat and said, "What? When you look at me that way, what do you see?" On 2 levels. The Yamanaka silently cursed herself. Once for stuttering and again for succumbing to temptation and posing the question that had been bothering her for so long. After grinning broadly, Naruto stroked the back of his head and said, I'm not sure. You look very lovely like that," he said quietly. As she sank in on herself and concentrated on eating, Ino blushed slightly, her cheeks flecked with red, and she muttered, "Naruto baka." The Omiai with her face mask fluttering its eyelashes. The woman was laughing softly at a story the man was telling her. "So that's how the Hokage monument got painted," she said with a cute laugh. "Oh yeah," the man said, nodding his head. It was refreshing for the young woman, who for obvious reasons could not comprehend why the village detested the blonde boy. "That Naruto is a devious one when he sets his mind to it," the man said in a deep voice, full of joy and pride. It wasn't exactly illegal to get information from her counterpart, and there weren't many people in this village who treated Naruto fairly, let alone with favor. "You sound very fond of Naruto-kun," she said cautiously. Many customers, including the blonde couple, were drawn to the man's throaty laugh. "Well, you could definitely say that. There's far too few kids, ninja or otherwise, with the potential that he holds, and I would love to see it cultivated," he finally acknowledged. "If things were different, I would have adopted him myself," he returned politely. "Well, that's all that I want to know," the woman said with a beatific smile, her resolve strengthened by the man's words of ecstasy. Even as she reached to remove her mask, she declared, "I would be happy to marry any man who loves Naruto for the wonderful child that he is. Although I must admit that this idea of an Omiai caught me off guard, it was definitely worth the date," the man said. Coughing lightly at the announcement and reaching to take off his own mask, he returned formally, his mask moving away from his face. "And, I can't promise an immediate marriage or anything of the sort, but I would gladly extend my proposal," he said. Silence fell as the carbon fragments drifted away. Surprisingly, it wasn't the Omiai pair. It was a rather shocking silly Naruto, now standing from his seat and pointing at the pair accusingly. The dull thuds of Naruto's chair reverberated as it bounced behind him. "Gigi. Ayame-chan. What on earth are you doing here?" he posed a fierce challenge. Only slightly embarrassed, Ino palmed her face and pulled the blonde boy out of the restaurant. "You have no idea what I had to go through to get these two to agree to an Omiai in the first place," she said gently, reprimanding Naruto-kun, "so you can't go around acting that way." After a few moments of glaring at the blonde girl across from him, Naruto's eyes softened. "But why would Ayame-chan and Gigi go out together?" Naruto punctuated the obvious by saying, "He's so old." "Obviously, women like an established man," Ino said, huffing and crossing her arms beneath her tiny breasts. "He's one of the village's oldest ninjas, and by civilian standards, he still moves around like he's 40. Ayame could at least have a man she wouldn't have to fear dying every week while on a mission. He's only going to be Hokage for another 5 years, given the current course of events," she said. Naruto gave her a bewildered blink. "What, why 5 years? He's going to have to retire, and at that point, I'm assuming that he will name you the Godem, idiot," Ino said, looking at her fellow blonde and wondering for the first time in a year if Naruto was actually the stereotype for their shared hair color. "Where do you see yourself after 5 years of training?" Naruto's face gradually lit up with a smile as he realized, I'm going to be Hokage Tte Ibeo. Ino could only sigh and shake her head, thinking, of course, that's the only thing he heard in that whole exchange, and lamenting in her mind that, regrettably, Naruto was choosing the blonde over the genius today as she had previously observed. He could appear to be a genius on some days and the stereotypical blonde on others. Inside the eatery, Hiruzen cleared his throat softly as he gazed at the young woman's form across from him. To be honest, he had never met the young woman and had only seen her face a few times, either in passing or through some paperwork across his desk, neither of which Hiruzen was positive of. Nevertheless, he felt his heated cheeks only darken as he watched the teen's eyes sparkle as she gazed upon his form. Hiruzen Sarutobi, he said warmly, getting to his feet and bowing formally. The older man's words broke Ayame's stunned stare, and she began, blushing as scarlet as her dress. Ayame Ichiraku. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sandame-sama, she said formally in return, greeting the village chief and the renowned shinobi no Kami with an overly deep bow. With one Naruto Uzumaki missing, Ino reappeared as the two straightened themselves. Wow, this is fantastic. I knew you would get along. Eat your childish heart out, Hanabi. I'm so kicking your butt in the matchmaking game, she said proudly as she returned, adding, but I thought maybe 2 or 3 dates would be required before the reveal happened. After a few moments, the matched pair looked up at Ino, with Ayame being the first to find her voice. How did you manage to set this up? She asked out loud as she looked at her young friend. The pair flushed as they looked at each other and then away in a nervous outburst. With a Cheshire cat smile, Ino said, well, you see, and started. A few days earlier, Hiruzen sighed as he drew on his pipe and gazed out the window at the entire village. His mind relived memories of more than 10 years ago, a time before the Kyuubi attack and before he had lost his beloved wife, Bawako, the charming head of the hospital in Mednans, who would frequently find herself walking down the streets towards his tower and would always stop to smile up at him as he watched his village. Now, everything was different, and it was evident as his face crossed from the past into the present. A village square that had been completely rebuilt, with only a quarter of the traffic from that era, no longer was a smiling Bawako, but he did stop a happy Naruto, bouncing along the street with Mixing pursuing him, the two engaged in some sort of banter. The sound of a throat clearing behind him reawakened the Hokage to the presence of someone else in the room. Tired shoulders sagged a little lower before Hiruzen turned about to face his youngest son, Asuma, and his squad of genin. Sandame-sama, he addressed in concern. You said you had a special mission for us? Yes, I apologize, said Hiruzen, nodding his head, his eyes far away and almost haunting. Ino easily noticed the stare from across the room. Shikamaru tried his best to ignore it, and Shoji was just naive as he munched on a bag of chips. Tora, the Fire Lord's cat, has gotten away and must be found. It ought to be in the village somewhere, he offered softly as he took a few puffs of his pipe. Here's a picture, and strangely enough, he flees when you call his name, so that should be enough of a deciding factor when seeking him out. Yes sir, we'll accept the assignment, Asuma said, nodding and casting a gloomy glance at his children. Aware of the amount of hell they were about to endure, he led Shikamaru and Shoji out of the room and said, okay kids, let's go catch us a cat, with affection. For a while, there was only Ino and Hiruzen, with the elder sitting in his high-backed chair. Yes, Miss Yamanaka? With sympathy for the elderly ninja, Ino scowled a little. Sandame-sama, how long have you been alone? I mean, Asuma-sensei is your youngest as he's been gone since right after the Kyuubi attack. Does that mean you've been alone since then? Hiruzen took a few puffs and coughed lightly. His aging eyes assessed Ino similarly to how he would any adult confronting him, which, to be honest, made the blonde girl a little uneasy and restless. Finally, he said, I'm not sure how that relates to you, Ino. The finality of the words should have scared the girl away, but she obstinately stayed, biting her bottom lip for a few seconds as she peered at the exits. Well, what if I could find someone for you, someone that you might feel a real connection with? The Hokage asked inquisitively, without being harsh, like some form of matchmaker. Aren't you a few decades too young? The majority of the younger generation, after all, didn't seem to care about the ancient customs, much less matchmaking. Ino gave a head nod. She came back, missing the elder's embarrassed expression. Yeah, I'm really young, but one might also argue that I'm too young to be a fully trained ninja. Hokage-sama, she said, I'm actually really good at matching people. I use an algorithm that compiles info from star signs, chemistry, affinity, occupation and even age. By the time I've run my calculations, you'll be paired with your soulmate, or your money back, she exclaimed happily. Hiruzen's eyebrow went up. My money back? Well, I'm not exactly running a charity, and someone has to pay for the Omiya expenses, she replied with ease. Nervously, Hiruzen swallowed. He briefly noticed the same sparkle in Ino's eyes that his longtime friend Kaharu Utatane had when they were matchmaking all those years ago. He protested, I'm not really looking, but Ino cut him off. That's right. You most certainly are not searching, and that's the biggest problem. You have nothing to fight for anymore, and because of that, you are lacking the fire in your eyes that you once held each year. I could see it dwindling more and more, until now where it looks like embers, she continued before adding, embers that are about to go out. Hiruzen did not close his mouth. He felt compelled to object, to correct this young child. However, even as he met her eyes, he knew she was telling the truth and that she was aware that she had all the cards. So, child, he said in a dejected tone as he paced the room, getting ready to smoke his pipe. What, exactly, would you suggest that I do to resolve this problem? As she slid up beside a gentle old man and rubbed her shoulder against his side, Ino smiled like an angel as a reward for being the heir to the Yamanaka clan and having such a close relationship with the Sarutobi clan. She quietly complained, for starters, you need to stop smoking so much, it's stinky, and took the pipe from him. Hiruzen's shoulders slumped and he gave in after his face briefly lowered as he thought about losing his pipe in the absence of his late wife, Bawako, who had always controlled his purchases and usage. He was aware that he had been adorning himself softly. Okay, so less smoking, he said. With that angelic light still shining in her eyes, Ino shook her head. No, I said, no more smoking, as in it all, she corrected coldly. Ino thought she saw a tear in the older ninja's eye for a brief moment. Actually, before the man turned to gaze sorrowfully out of the window, she heard a few brief sniffles. She threw the pipe in a trash can with a smile on her face. Good, you've accepted that rather easily, it'll make the next part much easier, she said. Hiruzen really tried not to flinch when he heard his pipe being trashed. Regretfully, Ino tutted him after catching a backward glance of his eyes. The man shivered, remembering his beloved Bawako's use of the same tone when she was Ino's age. When I get here tomorrow, I expect that pipe to still be in this bin, Hokage-sama, she said. The sounds of breathing and people moving around in the hallway were the only sounds to break the quiet for a short while. You're going to help me build a profile for yourself so I can start matchmaking, she exclaimed with joy. When Kaharu Utatane happened to be entering, with a menacing sparkle in her eyes as she held a delicate hand to her mouth, Hiruzen lifted a hand and opened his mouth to object. With more than a hint of amusement in her voice, the woman pointed out, don't even consider refusing. Hiru-chan, what would Bawako say if she knew you spent the last 12 years doing everything she hated you doing, and on top of that you never moved on from her? Oh, it had been a long time since she had been so thrilled about interfering in other people's affairs. Although she now makes it her career, the fire was extinguished until today. Ino smiled and made the V motion to signal her victory. Okay, I have a partner in this, she exclaimed with joy. When Kaharu looked at the young blonde girl, she briefly thought she was seeing a younger Bawako. This was not because the two looked exactly alike, but rather because Ino perfectly captured the playful spirit and nature of the elderly woman. Hiruzen had married her warm offer, I'll do you one better, I'll even help you to set up this old codger with someone, was completely out of character for the elderly ninja. Ino cocked her head slightly to the side. Considering the offer, Ino made the statement, on the next one I can certainly use the help, but this one, I'll be taken care of on my own. I do have a rival after all. After giving a gentle nod, Kaharu turned to look around the room and noticed that someone was noticeably missing for the first time. Hokage-sama, where is Homira? Homira frantically waved for pity at his longtime friend and former teammate, but neither woman in the room could see him. He was currently curled into a tight ball and concealed beneath the Hokage's desk. Don't let he find me, he whispered to the gods who had long favored him. He had noticed that glimmer in Kaharu's eyes as soon as they entered the office, and he had fled to conceal himself. Without his pipe to rely on, Hiruzen coughed lightly. I haven't seen him, he said, lying assiduously. Kaharu turned to go. Narrowing her eyes dangerously, she glared back at Hiruzen, sending a chill up the man's spine. Ino, come with me. I'll offer you a few pointers on what the old codger likes to do and what matches his personality, she said. Hiruzen cried out in a little terror. Yeesh, it feels like she just walked over my grave, just before Homura scurried from his hiding spot. Yeah, no kidding, nice save by the way, Hiru-kun, he said, arm punching him like a brother. Hiruzen gave a head nod with a playful reply. Yeah, well, you owe me one, a really big one. This time, however, if these two women became overly demanding about his dating life, he might have to ask for help. A few minutes later, with Kaharu and Ino, as she heard and considered what the elder had to say, Ino tapped a finger to her chin thoughtfully. Well, I know of maybe 3 women in this village that would fit with that criteria. Kurenai Uchiha, Anko Midarashi and Ayame Ichiraku, she replied softly. As Kaharu thought about the three women, two of whom were young ninja and the third a simple girl working a ramen stand, she blinked a few times with firmness. She interrupted, "If I may offer some advice." With a nod, Ino showed her that she was paying attention to the older ninja. "Maybe the women you're considering are all too young?" Ino gave a firm shake of her head. "You understand this world better than anyone else." Ino denied, "Old men like young girls. Why would the Hokage want some aged-old prune with saggy bits when he can have a young and beautiful kunoichi to warm his bed?" As Kaharu thought about her own sagging areas, she began to object, but was stopped when the dynamic duo happened upon Anko Mitarashi and Kurenai Uchiha, who were leaving a sushi restaurant and talking animatedly. "Aha!" Ino exclaimed with pride. Gesturing to the two women as though she were a higher authority, Ino gave 2 stacks of papers to each ninja with gratitude. "There's no escaping your fates. I need you two to fill out these forms," she ordered. After exchanging glances, the kunoichi accepted the papers and turned to leave. Like a tiger with a new kill, Ino smiled as she yelled the next words. "You have until midnight to finish those forms, ladies." Kaharu opened her aged eyes, intent on a cage-level wash over the younger ninja, and spoke as only Anko opened her mouth, her right hand already blazing with flames as she prepared to set fire to the stacks with a sharp voice that sounded like gravel. She said, "Please make sure that you fill in every line, Miss Mitarashi, Miss Uchiha." Yes ma'am," Anko said feebly. Shivering a little, Anko threw her documents at Kurenai as soon as they rounded a corner. "Gods above, why'd I have to fill out so many damn forms? I haven't even been on a good mission in months." With a small chuckle, Kurenai walked beside her friend and started reading the questions. Kurenai said, "Well, it could be worse," while reading a line. "At least your favorite clothes are fishnet mesh and short skirts. How do I explain that I wrap myself in a single strip of paper from neck to mid-thigh? Can you imagine what would happen if that knowledge got out?" As Ebisu, who was just walking with his genin team, passed out at the publicly declared admission, Anko laughed. She teased, "Haha. I always knew that Creep was a pervert. All his talk of being so upstanding was just bullshit." As the 3 children began tapping the man awake, she reprimanded Kurenai. "Oi, kids, stop messing him like that," and then gave him a gloomy smile. With a demon-like expression, the taller woman reached into her folds and took out several permanent ink pens. She offered morbidly, "Here, draw on his face. It usually wakes him up faster." As they took the pens and began to sketch, the 3 genin matched the women with similarly dark features. "Well, if you think it will help," Yakumo said, grinning menacingly.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.